to go south at any time. Get Rick to call Isabel if you need anything." I turned my back, leaving him blinking after me. I was probably being mean, but the necromancers were my lowest priority. The evidence that their ancestors had been too cowardly to protect anyone else in the last war was written on all those empty graves. Wait a second. Necromancy was death magic, and so was mine, kind of. Was the necromancer's ability to interact with spirits not working because it was similar to fairy magic? That is, the branch of winter magic which involved dealing with death? Possibly. Theon wanted control over life and death itself, and he'd already proven he'd wreck anything in his path to get there. The chief and his fellow half-bloods trailed after me out of the gate, complaining all the way. I ignored them, messaging Vance to ask him to add Necromancer headquarters to the list of safe houses. They were welcome to gripe all they liked, but their headquarters could easily fit a bunch more people in there. I also told Vance I was taking the half-bloods somewhere safe. He didn't need to listen to the chief's complaints on top of dealing with the leadership issue. Once the half-fairies were headed in the right direction, I diverged and made for their old territory, just in case the Banshee had left any clues behind as to why the fairies' magic in this realm had entirely disappeared. It was much longer to walk on foot than I remembered, so I took the bus. The mundane action drove home how utterly oblivious most people here were to the threat of another war. Just over 20 years was enough not to forget, but enough to drop some of the necessary precautions. The number of alarmed looks I got because of the 2 swords I carried was enough for me to pull every spare iron ward from my pocket and pass them out to bemused people on the bus. "What is this?" asked a confused-looking teenage human boy. "Iron spell," I said. "Hit the button to activate it. It'll keep the fairies out of your house." "Why would fairies come in my house?" "Have you been living on another planet the last few weeks?" I snapped. He looked alarmed. Of course, the kid hadn't been born before the last invasion. "Look, just put up the ward and don't let any evil fairies in." "Obviously," said an old woman sitting behind him. "Iron didn't always work last time. You're the fairy killer, aren't you?" "Yeah." Even the humans, non-supernatural, mundane humans, knew who I was now? That's new. "Stay safe. You might need that ward sooner than you think." I left the bus and walked the rest of the way to the clearing, which had once belonged to the half-bloods. The hedges around the territory had disappeared. The grass on the field was yellow and dead, and the blocks of flats which had once been the half-bloods' home stank of neglect. No. Decaying magic. The sort that attracted the worst evil fae. No wonder the half-bloods hadn't come back. The presence of so much death should have made my sword react. But again, no response. This is wrong. I walked along the fence, not daring to go inside and leave myself up to the mercy of the Grey Vale's fae. But the sight of the forest at the path's end halted my steps. The witches' forest. I'd last been in there to ask for their help finding Theon in the cauldron. It might be an idea to get their advice before I went on with my plan to talk to the shifter god. They'd known my talisman had the magic of a god inside it. I reached for the nearest tree, frowning. The defenses the witches had put up around their territory weren't here anymore. Last time, I'd been thrown aside when I'd tried to walk in. Had they lowered their defenses because Theon hadn't attacked yet, or for some other reason? Was I walking into a trap? I hesitated, and then took one step into the woods. Then another. Nothing stopped me. Trees crowded around, ancient oaks and elms which belonged to a time before even the fairies had come here. The witches' forest had its own kind of magic, and even the threat of the Grey Vale didn't affect it. Creepy noises dogged my steps. unseelie fae. They wouldn't have had reason to flee the forest when the banshee showed up. In fact, she'd only taken half-bloods with her. That alone was suspicious. Theon had explicitly wanted the half-fairies to come and fight on his side, but he'd left all the pure-blooded fairies in this realm behind. Why? I stopped as smoke coalesced on the path in front of me, and Jerry's ghost appeared. It's a trick, an illusion. The witches were fond of tricking anyone who came into the woods. They recognized me as a friend now, but apparently I still needed to pass some kind of test. Jerry spoke. I was there when Avocus claimed a mortal woman. There were rumors of a child they had living in their quarters. Wait. This was a replay of the scene in the Vale, the last time I'd seen him, which meant the witches were reading my memories from my talisman again. That's all well and good, I said. But whereabouts is this Laurel, if she's even alive? Jerry pointed behind him at the tangled mass of trees. The warped branches parted in an archway, letting me through. The old man's ghost smiled at me, then disappeared. I walked through the archway, and everything went dark. Hello, I called. Bloody witches. Couldn't give me a light switch. Actually, I should have brought a light spell. But I hadn't planned to make this detour. I'd idiotically assumed that my sort of friendship with the witches, or at least the fact that I'd saved their lives, gave me a free pass. Apparently not. This is the empty part of our woods, whispered a voice. Cordelia, the witch who led what was left of the Hemlock Coven. Yeah, looks that way. I'd rarely seen such total darkness, as though all light had vanished from the world. What is this? A place where no memories linger. The person within has lost them, carried away by Faerie. What? Someone's memories are lost to Faerie? Someone here in the forest? The witches had replayed memories from my talisman at me the last time I'd been here. Can you show me another memory? I need to know where Avocus got my talisman. It's not that simple, said the voice. Abruptly, the darkness faded out, revealing a tree with a wizened face carved into it. We cannot seek out a specific memory. The power within your talisman is alien to ours. My hands dropped to my sides. So you can't help me? There is something else you seek, isn't there? I laughed emptily. Sure, I'd like a lot of things. The easiest is to speak to Calder's mortal mother, but that's a long shot. I only know her first name. Other than that, I'd quite like to know how to beat Theon when he's immune to magic and can be reborn if he dies. I know he's not really a god, but he might as well be. Last time, I'd been right here in the forest for our duel to the death. After the ring had worn down his defenses, I'd poisoned him with iron, and he died. But his spirit had survived. My talisman could kill ghosts, but not him. So it wouldn't help me if I got to the same stage again. And I was positive that even without the cauldron, he'd be taking more steps to ensure I didn't slip past his defenses. No, said the witch. I'm afraid I don't know enough about fairy talismans, much less yours. However, we can help you. She looked down, and light spread around the tree. She is here, but her memory is blank. Beside the tree sat a woman, in a hunched position. She looked up at me, her eyes frighteningly blank. Blue, but not the eerie glow of winter magic. Human, but something was off about her. Is this Avocus's lover? What happened to her? Laurel was painfully thin and looked hardly capable of standing on her own feet. If Calder had told me the truth, he'd been abandoned here 20 years ago, so she must have been left at the same time. Calder had grown up alone, though, in the run-down places the half-bloods lived in, refusing to live either on the chief's territory or in the human world. Why had she abandoned him? What did he do to you? The words cracked something inside me. I'd been lucky. Avocus had never singled me out personally. The damage I'd suffered as his prisoner had been more passive, like when he'd punished everyone as a whole, and when Faerie's monsters had attacked me. I'd watched from the side, gaining skill with a blade and the knowledge of how to challenge him as an equal, then gone in for the kill. I hadn't experienced half the horrors she must have, as his lover. It was hardly a fair relationship in any sense, when she'd been kidnapped against her will and held captive in an alien world she couldn't escape. She didn't answer my question, which didn't surprise me in the least. Angry tears burned my eyes. I'd failed to save the other captives, but they were only the most recent of Avocus's victims. He'd been torturing humans for years before I'd fallen into his trap. "Hey," I whispered, the tears slipping free. "It's okay."
"She won't hear you," said Cordelia. "She's gone. He used his magic to make her catatonic, depending on magic to survive. That's why she ran here when the magic faded."
"What?" I looked up at the tree, scrubbing my eyes with one hand. "Is all the fairy magic in this realm really gone?"
"The Fae wouldn't be alive if it had, but it's weakened, and the veil grows stronger. You don't have much time."
"Tell me something I don't know." I straightened up. "Why shelter her in the forest? Can she help us?"
"There is a chance this woman has the memories you need, ones even the forest cannot reach. In order to gain access to that memory, magic other than ours is needed."
"What magic?" I'd never seen anything like the Hemlock Witch's forest before. Maybe the fairies had a way of extracting a memory, or... Aha. Lady Harper. I need to bring Lady Harper here.
"As I said, it's only a small chance. Her mind is fractured. Killing her would be a mercy. She did not even know her own child, and left him alone."
Still doesn't make me feel sorry for Calder. He enabled this. He'd caused so much damage by freeing Fionn. But I had my plan. I'd find Lady Harper, and through her learn where Avocus had got his talisman. Anything to get clues about how to destroy Fionn. "Okay," I said. "I'll come back, but really I need all the help I can get. I know screwing around with death magic is a bad idea, but that's exactly what Fionn's doing. I need to learn how to stop him. My magic can't kill him. You stopped him before."
"Using the combined power of several generations of magic. It's ours. Yours might serve you, but if it's anything like other talismans, the amount of power it contains pales in comparison to its source."
The god. Yeah, that. I don't suppose you can advise me on how to talk to them, if I can even find them.
"You already know how. You know the language."
I looked up sharply. Invocations. I'd been so wrapped up in everything else, I hadn't worked out what to do with the invocations in the Major's storeroom. I supposed that, seeing as Fionn didn't need them to beat me, I might as well take them for myself. But she was right. I did know the language. At least, my talisman did.
"Correct,"
said the witch.
As to the whereabouts of the gods, if I knew, the knowledge would be more widespread than it is, aside from the sleeping one in the forest.
Yeah, probably best to leave him where he is. I paused, my heart lifting suddenly. Unless there's a chance of extracting the ring from where I threw it without destroying this realm? Just enough to kill Fionn.
No, croaked the witch. The dimension you temporarily gained access to is in a fragile state. If you opened the rift again, all the realms would fracture.
I winced. Yeah, thought so. Worth a try. So I need her memories. But you never said why you can't read more memories from the talisman. Like where it came from. How Avocus got hold of it. You showed me how Avocus and Velkas talked about Fionn's plans to start the invasion, so I know the memory goes back to before I was born.
Like I told you, croaked the witch. It's complicated. You know the talisman's history. It was created by the Winter Court. Our visions cannot show the courts. The Grey Veil doesn't count because it's not under the same protections.
Oh, that made sense. But after the talisman was abandoned, or lost, did the courts themselves put the power of the god into it? Or did that happen after? Did Avocus? No way. He'd been stripped of his magic before exile. But Fionn hadn't. At least, I didn't think so.
It's not often that the forest gets to read a fairy talisman. But memory isn't possible without the human who owns it, and the past can swallow you whole. Choose wisely how you spend your time, Ivy.
The other woman made a soft whimpering noise, looking around as though she heard the witch's voice from the tree, but her gaze was unfocused. I hated to leave her like this. If the fairies had been responsible for the damage, though, there was nothing to be done. No, I don't believe that. Lady Harper knew more than I did about mind magic, and I'd get her to help me no matter what it took. Thanks anyway, I said to the witch. I hurried out of the forest, my thoughts whirling. The witches were wiser than anyone gave them credit for. They'd also been the first to realize the invasion was coming. I'd inferred that the Hemlock Coven had detected the presence of the ring when Fionn first brought it to their forest and were able to warn the other supernaturals. But the costs had been large, and with their own magic chained to the forest and locked into place, stopping the god in the between world from escaping into this realm, the amount of help the Hemlock Coven could give was limited. Once again, my friends and I were the last line of defense between this realm and the Grey Veil. And if we had to depend on the bad-tempered former head mage, Lady Harper, so be it. Chapter 10. First stop, the Mage's storeroom. It was less than half an hour's walk away from Half-Blood territory, so it made sense to go there first. But my skin prickled as I crossed the threshold to the deserted-looking old building. All the other houses in this part of town were abandoned, and the graveyard in the back belonging to the Majors had once yielded some particularly nasty undead. Fionn had said quite clearly he had no need of the contents of the storeroom himself, but I didn't want the invocations in enemy hands one way or another. The carpet in the corridor was torn, revealing bare floorboards that creaked under my steps. I hesitated, before remembering my blood had been added to the security spell, which normally let mages only through, so I'd be able to get into the most secure room. A layer of shimmering wards covered the door, making the whole building hum with residual energy. I undid the wards, my hands shaking with the power. The room looked to an outsider like an old display of antiques in a museum with bizarre taste. Cabinets containing mage artifacts filled most of the space. At the back, however, lay parchment covered in symbols, which drew my gaze even from here. I held my breath as the cabinet opened, and a crash resounded from somewhere above. I tensed, drawing my sword. Stashing the documents in my inside pocket, I held on to my blade with both hands. Even without magic, Helena was wicked sharp, and more resilient than any man-made weapon I'd owned. A small figure ran into the room, wielding a dagger. With a yell, he jumped at me. I lurched back, nearly colliding with the cabinet. "Quentin!" I gasped. Quentin lowered his weapon. "Ivy? What are you doing here?" "Retrieving the invocations before someone steals them." His gaze went to my back, and the second sword strapped there. "You took the life drinker?" "Fair and square," I said. "Vance is okay. I couldn't get back to Summer. Lord Burdock attacked me, and I ended up in the Vale. This isn't a great place to talk, but it's all right. Vance is safe." "Yes, I know," he said. "You, however, should not be meddling with invocations at a time like this." "What else should I do? Leave them here? I'm not letting Theon and his people get hold of them. Theon gave the life drinker to a half-blood kid who got a new body from the cauldron. I killed him, but he has more of them. Have you heard anything of whether Summer might change their minds and help us after all?" "I spoke to my other family. They have agreed to a meeting in 2 weeks' time." "The invasion might come any second now," I burst out. "God damn it! I know your people think we have all the time in the world, but we don't. I need to find Lady Harper. Any idea where she might be?" "No." The building shook as though something heavy had landed on it. I leaned against the nearest wall for balance. Shattering glass reached my ears, followed by more crashes. Someone's breaking in. Or rather, a giant had landed on the roof and was intent on tearing the building apart. At least that's what it sounded like. I had no intention whatsoever of being in here when it collapsed. Quentin and I ran for the front doors. Blade held high, I leaped out of the door and spun to face a gigantic black bird with wings like huge sails. The Morrigan. I knew it. "Hey!" I yelled. "There's nothing in there you want!" Theon must have sent her. Why he hadn't come in person, I didn't know. But the Morrigan was just as evil, if less powerful. Her ability, tearing souls out and devouring them, was too depraved even for Winter, although she'd originally belonged to their court. Her crow form was fearsome, the size of a small car, which explained how her giant talons had crushed half the roof. Good job we hadn't been on the upper floor of the building, which was empty. "Get over here!" I yelled again, waving my talisman at her. With my magic not working, I was hardly equipped to fight her in this realm. She was semi-immortal, and I hadn't even managed to wound her before. But this was a reckoning we'd had coming for a long time. She worked for Theon. Now it was time to make her regret ripping out Vance's soul. The Morrigan tore another chunk out of the roof with her taloned claw, revealing a chain around her foot. Iron. It clearly didn't hurt her, but then again, she wasn't a conventional fairy. A death goddess working with Theon. The chain, though. Her leg shifted, and glyphs flashed across the metal band looped around her foot. Something's binding her. Her arrangement with Theon wasn't two-way. He'd enslaved her somehow. He must have sent her to find me, after I'd helped Vance and Drake escape her trap. This time, I was going to make her pay. Her talon lashed out. I fell back, raising my sword in defense. Work, magic. A dark shadow fell overhead. The air swirled with thick blackness denser than fog. Not shadows, but birds. Hundreds of them. Oh, hell. She'd brought an army. That emergency warning had better be ready, Vance. Shit's about to go down. Problem. I was on the opposite side of the city from any backup. When would I learn? The Morrigan's huge black wings beat, and her gaze passed over my head. I held my breath. If she used her fear effect to paralyze me, I'd be in real trouble. My sword felt like a flimsy piece of wood without its usual blue glow. Her talon whipped out, narrowly missing me. Not a killing blow. She planned to rip my soul out of my body, just as she'd done to Vance. The air rippled with power, and the air shifted, knocking the Morrigan flying back into the house next to the storeroom with enough force to shatter the windows. The giant bird screamed in pain and anger, and Vance appeared in front of me. "Damn it," I said. "You couldn't leave her to me."
"She's mine to kill."
Fury shadowed Vance's face.
"And she'll pay."
"Damn right," Drake said from next to him, holding a handful of flames. "Wait, Quentin?" The brownie had concealed himself behind me, and I couldn't say I blamed him. "Quentin, if ever there was a good time to tell Summer we're being attacked by Winter's monsters, it's now," I told him. The Morrigan screeched, lashing out and sending pieces of shattered brick flying. Vance had given her a hell of a hit, and she cast her fiery gaze over all of us. "Look away!" I yelled. "Don't look her in the eyes, whatever you do!" "I'll scorch her eyes out!" Drake ran at her, throwing a handful of fire. The Morrigan flung a wave of brick dust at us, swamping the fire and kicking her way free of the house. I screwed my eyes up at the explosion of dust, and when I opened them, Vance had disappeared. The noise coming from the smoke told me he was matching her strike for strike. Get out of there! He'd nearly had his soul ripped out once already, and I'd only been able to save him because the grey veil was so close to death. I wasn't sure I could repeat the performance in this realm without my magic working at all. The smoke cleared a little. The Morrigan held Vance, gripping him in her talon. He let out a pained snarl.
"No, you don't."
"Let go of him, you evil old bitch, or so help me I'll tear your soul from your body with my bare hands."
"You took my souls from me," she croaked. "I'll take this one."
"No." I held up my sword, wishing it radiated blue light like it did in Faerie. "I won't let you. Put him down. I don't care if you're an omen of death or what Fionn told you to do. You won't be ruining any more lives."
"I will gain the souls I was promised, or I will reap them from this realm instead."
Vance moved without warning, disappearing and reappearing behind her. His knife flew in a perfect arc, burying itself in the back of her head. On anyone else, it'd have been an instant kill. The Morrigan screeched like a seagull, but didn't fall. Drake threw a handful of fire, which passed over my head and collided with the Morrigan. But mage magic hardly did any damage. Even my magic didn't. We're at an impasse. Her talon struck, and I swiped in retaliation. My sword ripped through her claw, and her head flailed back, her gaze connecting with mine. Shit. No. Too late. The fear effect hit immediately, paralyzing my limbs as ice flooded my body. At my side, Drake had frozen too. But Vance hadn't. A breeze kicked up. Then a torrent of displaced air thwacked the Morrigan from behind, breaking her gaze. Her claw shot out, knocking me off my feet. Pain tore up my leg. I didn't have my healing ability in this realm. Eyes watering with pain, I looked up to see Vance and the Morrigan grappling with one another. Shifter against shifter. No. Shifter against Death Goddess. Even using his mage ability in conjunction, it wasn't enough. Worse, the cloud cover of birds grew ever thicker. They'd start attacking the rest of the city any second now. Maybe they already had. I couldn't fight her with my leg like this. I scrambled in my pocket for a healing spell. The Morrigan's gaze snapped onto me again as the invocation sheet fell out of my pocket. My gaze caught on the symbols, words rising to my tongue. Come on, for God's sake. I need a freaking translation. My vision flickered again, and the words' meanings slid into my mind, like a distant object coming into focus. I could read them, and I knew which I wanted. I screamed the words, and though my magic didn't respond, something inside me came loose. As the Morrigan disappeared in a flurry of black feathers, my body gave out, and blackness rose to swallow me.
Ivy?
Said Isabel.
Ivy, rise and shine.
Ow, I groaned, shifting position. I lay on a sofa in a living room I didn't recognize. I blinked, sitting up, and Vance walked into the room, his angry expression softening into relief when he saw my eyes were open. What happened? I croaked.
You banished the Morrigan, apparently,
said Isabel. I rubbed my forehead. Ow, feels like the hangover from hell. What did you do? Asked Drake. Used an invocation to banish her, I said. There isn't much fairy magic left in this realm. It's Fion's doing, but I don't know how. Anyway, I think it weakened the effects. I wouldn't expect it to last forever. If I used those words at full power... Unlike... Wait a minute. Holy crap. The words I'd spoken held a weird familiarity, a hollowness I recognized from somewhere. The vision when I'd seen through Avocus's eyes. I'd felt it. The pain of being ripped away from Faerie. With those the words uttered by the She when they exiled one of their own. Might I do the same to Fion? It can't be. He said invocations don't affect him. Besides, banishing him would only be postponing the problem. He'd still be able to rain terror down on any world he went into. Also, I could usually speak invocations only when in Faerie, or near a source of powerful magic. I'd been carrying 2 talismans, but it wouldn't surprise me if I'd made the dire state of fairy magic in this realm worse by drawing on so much of it. I sat up slowly, but my body didn't hurt. Someone must have used a healing spell on me. To my relief, my talismans leaned against the sofa next to me. Where are we?
Francine's old house,
said Isabel.
The witches have moved in here, and some of the mages have come along. At the moment, we're mobilizing, spreading as many spells throughout town as we can.
Good, I said. I didn't expect Fion to send his second-in-command so soon. Did you sort out your new council? Temporarily, Vance said. But there's a chance of interference from outsiders. Like Lady Granville. Leave her out in the cold. This is war. The Morrigan went to your stores for a reason. Yes, I expect so, said Vance. Perhaps to crush our last defense. Maybe she thought I'd put the life drinker there, I said. Damn. It's unfair that one side gets all the immortals and the other doesn't. Who made the rules here? I want a rematch. His mouth quirked. I'm glad you're feeling like yourself again, Ivy. But we have a problem. The shifters are rioting, apparently. There's been unrest all over town since the Mage Council collapsed. A door slammed. What in the hell is going on in here? Yelled a familiar voice. Grandma, stop! Said another voice. Wanda. My heart lifted, and Vance walked out into the hallway to open the door. Sure enough, Vance's assistant, a kind-faced young woman who looked like she might work in a library rather than for the majors, stood beside a fearsome old woman leaning on a walking stick and glaring bloody murder in my direction. "You're alive," I said to Wanda. "You've no idea how happy I am to see you."
"I'm sorry I didn't call," she said to Vance.
"My grandmother wanted to keep me in a safe house outside the city, but we were attacked by Furies. When we heard what happened to the council, we tried to come back. The journey was pretty rough. There are Furies everywhere. We had to stay another night." "We kind of need your grandmother," I said. "Specifically, we need her ability."
What?
Vance looked at me, puzzled. Even Lady Harper looked momentarily surprised. "Yeah, I've had an interesting morning," I said. Chapter 11.
"I can't believe you're dragging me into the forest," said Lady Harper.
Vance's former mentor wasn't my biggest fan. She'd been on the Mage Council after the invasion to help rebuild the city, but also had a history with the Hemlock Witches. Hers and Wanda's family was part mage, part witch. Her own ability, which involved being able to extract memories and influence thoughts, made her one of the most powerful mages in the city. Even though she was pushing 85 and walking with a cane, half the wild fae we encountered on the path ran away from her. "How are you even doing that?" I asked. "Poking them with your mind?"
"Essentially," she said in an irritable tone.
"This had better be important." "I already told you it is." To say she wasn't fond of me was an understatement. She hadn't liked me before I'd destroyed several fairy artifacts and nearly gone to war with Fionn. Even my bringing Vance back from Faerie didn't warm her towards me, probably because she blamed me for getting him captured in the first place. I didn't have time to argue. As long as we got this done and figured out a way to help Laurel, I'd put up with her complaining. Vance looked at her.
"There's a human woman in here whose memories might be able to end the war against Fionn before it starts."
That was stretching the truth a little, but if it worked, I'd go for it. I doubted Avocus would have confided all his secrets to a human, but he'd messed with her head for a reason. He might have let some information slip.
"You want me to break that woman's mind?"
"It's already broken." I winced. I didn't know what else to do. Avocus did something to her.
"Avocus who?"
"What rock have you been living under for the last year?" I held my tongue on even less polite remarks. "She-Lord, exile, total dick who kidnapped humans, father of that moron Calder, the guy who owned this sword before I killed him."
"There's no need to be rude," said Lady Harper.
"Extracting a memory is a painful process, and with her mind damaged by magic, my ability might be limited."
"I was afraid of that," said Vance. "The magic which affected her mind is fairy magic, not like ours. However, as Ivy says, the Hemlock Witches seem convinced it'll work."
We stopped in front of the same tree I'd found before. I hadn't followed the same route, but I'd sensed the witch's magic rearranging the forest around me, helping me along. It didn't surprise me that even Fionn had had trouble finding the witches in here. Pity they were tied up for the foreseeable future. Laurel was where I'd left her, underneath the tree. I crouched down to look into her eyes. Avocus had messed her up, badly. I'd seen him torture people in 1,000 ways, but for some reason he'd left her alive. Had he wanted her to take care of Calder? Or was he just careless and hadn't meant to damage her? As was becoming clear, the She were as fallible and prone to making errors as humans were. They just had a lot more time to do it in. Lady Harper leaned on her stick, frowning as she looked Laurel in the eyes. "Can you do it?" I asked.
"I can, but it's unlikely her memories will be fully restored. I've never seen anything like this before."
"She magic, right?"
"Certainly nothing human."
A shiver crawled down my back, but I remained where I was. The forest warped and shuddered like ripples on the surface of a lake. Then everything went dark. The sound of a baby crying brought me back to alertness. I blinked as a room appeared around me. Deep crimson carpets, stone walls, elaborate furniture. An arrow-slit window on my right, with a view across the forest. Holy shit! The witches must have upped their magic so I'd be thrown into the memory as soon as Laurel remembered. So I was her, inside the castle, holding baby Calder. Ugh. Looking down at him, though, he seemed like any other sleeping human baby. No signs of the evil maniac he'd grow up to be. You'd sort of expect Avocus's offspring would be born with horns or fangs, but he didn't even have any obvious signs of fairy blood, like pointed ears. Just a squashed-looking face, relaxing into sleep as the woman rocked him in her arms.
"He doesn't have my magic."
The voice came from my right. Avocus strode into view, looking at the baby more like a king surveying his servants than a father looking at his child. Visceral horror hit me, as it always did when I saw him, even in visions. Tall and slender, he wore pale silver armor, as he had when he'd been alive, and carried his sword, the talisman, loosely in one hand. The glyphs lit up blue as he drew closer to the baby. "He will be powerful, sir," said the woman. "I know he will. He'll be the heir you need."
"I don't need an heir," said Avocus. "I'm immortal."
The woman, me, flinched. "I know, sir. He will be your ally and your warrior."
"He looks human," said Avocus. "Humans are weak and pathetic. He doesn't have any magic."
"Did you have magic as a child, sir?"
"Enough insolence!"
He spun the sword, pointing it at me. And the baby. She gasped.
"Tell me why he won't have my magic."
"Because the court stole it from you, sir. You are more powerful than you ever were."
"And the gift cannot be passed on this way," he said. "The power of the gods resides with me alone."
"The gods?"
"You're a stupid human, aren't you?" goaded Avocus. "Always questioning everything. I have the power of the gods in my hand, and all you do is question me."
"Sir, I mean no disrespect to you. I love my son, and I hope you will too. He'll be—"
"A fool and a failure. Why ever did I decide to taint my blood with mortals?"
He loomed over her, and blue light flared up around him, the whole room trembling underneath his power.
"Do you know where I got this?"
A manic light shone in his eyes as he waved the talisman in her face.
"I took the darkest path down the vale, a path which belonged to the gods, and the gods themselves answered my call. Winter will fall under my power."
"It's him, isn't it?" said Laurel. "The man on the horse. I've seen you talking to him. He told you to leave me."
"He told me time is running out," said Avocus. "We're all going to be part of this war. I'm going to play my part in helping the true leader of Faerie regain his glory. Then I will march on Winter with my army."
"No, you won't," she said louder. "You stole the army. It'll go over to him, the man on the horse. He'll beat you, and you'll be dead, and I'll be alone."
"You want to be alone?" His voice echoed off the walls. "I have no need of a pathetic child, or a snivelling mortal who doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut. I will rise and take Winter back, and if it means I have to make a deal with a god, so be it."
"A god?"
"The huntsman is the god of death," said Avokis. "Even she fear him, for good reason. You'll either stand with me or against me, and I have no interest in protecting a fragile human."
"No," she said. "You're wrong.
I'm wrong, am I?"
He loomed over me, blue eyes alight with the magic pouring from his talisman. I gasped. So did the woman. His power rattled the whole room, and a cry sounded as the baby woke from sleep.
"I will have no more of you," roared Avokis. "You will never speak to me again. You will never set foot in my castle as long as you're alive, you pitiful mortal."
The world fractured. Screams sounded, the woman's and the child's, combined in a terrified shout as a word rang through my head, a word I'd heard before, but not in my voice. Instead, it came in someone else's. Cold, primal, terrifying.
"Forget."
I snapped back into my own mind, flat on the forest floor. Screams rang out around me, and I sat up, hitting my head on a tree branch. Branches surrounded me, caging me in a space hardly big enough to stand in. There was no sign of the others. I took in a breath, examining my own memories quickly to make sure the invocation hadn't affected me. That was nasty business. Avokis had shot that poor woman in the face with an invocation, and the aftermath felt like the gods themselves had scrambled my brains. I moved, but the branches didn't. Hemlock witches?" I asked uncertainly. "Mind letting the branches down?"
"Are you ready to fight?" asked Cordelia.
I shook my head, more in shock at what I'd seen than anything. Theon was pulling the strings from the beginning. He didn't like Avokis, but they were allies. Avokis had been scared enough of Theon's power to fight on his side, because getting back to Winter was his priority. But other than that, I hadn't learned anything of substance. I took the darkest path down the Vale, a path which belonged to the gods, and the gods themselves answered my call. Did that mean he'd literally met the god? Surely not. He'd had no magic when he was exiled. I turned around. There was no sign of Vance or Lady Harper. "Where are the others? What's going on out there?"
"You were attacked. Our forest was breached. We expelled the intruder, but too late."
"Laurel?"
"Dead. Your friends?"
"Let me out, please." I lifted my blade, and the branches pulled back. Carnage greeted me, and the smell of burning rushed in. Only then did I appreciate that the witch's magic had stepped up to protect me from harm while I was trapped in the vision. Someone had burned a wide section of the woods, leaving severed tree trunks and the scorched bodies of the Fae who'd lived in the trees. I ran, leaping over fallen branches and broken tree trunks. Furies circled overhead, above the road alongside Half-Blood territory where we'd come in. Lady Harper and Vance faced off against them. Without my magic, I was doubly vulnerable, and for all the power I'd seen in the vision, My sword gave no response whatsoever. I ran to Vance's side, flinging an iron dagger at the Fury's skull. It tumbled head over heels, and the knife disappeared and reappeared in my hand. "Thanks," I said to Vance. He was covered in Fury blood, but didn't look injured. Lady Harper hobbled up to us, leaning on her walking stick.
"The woman died," she told me. "If the Furies hadn't got her, the impact of reliving her memories would have. Is there any reason you decided to pass out at the crucial moment?"
"A vision," I said. "You must know how the Hemlock Witch's magic works. I wanted to see into her past and, well, I got it."
"And?"
She looked at me expectantly.
"What did you see?" asked Vance.
Avokis being a dick. He was boasting to Laurel about how he was going to use the invasion to take down Winter. He'd agreed to go along with Theon's plans for his shot at revenge. I guess he changed his goals when Theon ended up imprisoned. No wonder he was so pissed off the whole time I was imprisoned in the castle. He'd lost his one chance at revenge on the Winter Court.
"I thought you came here to learn crucial information about your talisman," said Lady Harper.
I did. I resheathed the blade. Unfortunately, nothing he said was very conclusive. He claimed to have walked on the same path the gods did, whatever that means. The whole of the Vale used to be their domain, I think.
"Not the beast in the forest," said Lady Harper.
"No, I guess not." I looked at her. "The Hemlock Witches were on the Council of 12. Did you know about the arrangement with the fairy courts? And the invasion? It was your time." Vance watched her too. She hadn't been around when Quentin had dropped the bombshell and revealed that he and Vance's grandparents had helped found a council between all the supernatural races. Her mouth thinned.
"I thought you'd ask me that, Ivy Lane."
Vance didn't say anything. I couldn't read his expression. "Well?"
"Yes," said Lady Harper. "I was on the council. It was my job to carry messages between the witches and the mages. That's how I heard the invasion was coming, when the Hemlock Coven felt the realms fracture. However, I didn't see the huntsman or his army. I was too busy protecting the forest from invading she, while that creature in there fought to escape into this realm."
"Oh." Vance nodded in understanding.
"I imagine everything that transpired between yourself and the witches is covered by the confidentiality agreement."
"You mean a spell that stops you talking about it?" I added, wondering why he wasn't angrier with her. Maybe he'd guessed before that she'd been involved. "That's all well and good, but why not at least give us a clue? You knew Theon was back, and we didn't have a council or a proper arrangement with the courts like last time."
"I can't go into Faerie, you foolish girl," said Lady Harper.
"I can," I snapped back at her. "You don't have to like it, but I'm your last shot. So it'd be really nice if you stopped omitting information until it's too late."
"I've told you everything I can," said Lady Harper. "The council can't exist as it did before. The she were entirely responsible for binding Theon. Because they died immediately afterwards, and I was preoccupied driving the enemy from the city, nobody told me what had occurred. Our survival depends on you, Ivy Lane. And if you're going to waste any more time chasing after the past, then our future will end. The huntsman's power is unchecked this time. He doesn't have the ring."
"He also doesn't have the cauldron," I added. "He can't be reborn. At least, I don't think so. But he can't make an army of immortal she."
"He can do worse," said Lady Harper. "I have no intention of hiding. but my ability is too limited. And if the enemies all wield magic like the barriers put on the woman's mind—
That wasn't a barrier, it was an invocation, I explained. He wiped her memory. Invocations are the language of the gods. Not Theon, but the actual ancient gods of Faerie. My power came from there. I tapped the hilt of my sword. Unfortunately, Theon didn't give me too many clues about where I can find him.
"Find the gods," said Lady Harper. "Have you not learned your lesson?"
"Nope," I said. "That wasn't the god I was thinking of anyway. There's one I can speak to because I know exactly where he is." A shadow passed over Vance's face.
"I don't like it."
"No other options," I said. "If the she won't help, there's one person I can speak to who might know how to defeat someone masquerading as a god. I'm the one who imprisoned him, so I should be able to find him again."
"But we run the risk of encountering Theon," Vance said. "Are you sure you're ready?"
"Not in the slightest, but we don't have much choice," I said. "We've got to go back to the Grey Vale and find the Dragon Shifter." Chapter 12. An hour later, Vance and I disappeared from the Major's safe house and reappeared in a field at the edge of Shifter territory. Even an hour was too long, but we'd needed to put a strategy into place for those left behind, assuming that Theon would attack no matter where we were. The Majors had spread across town in fortified shelters, where they'd be able to safely hide the people who were most vulnerable while fighting alongside the witches. Any necromancers who could fight were prepared to deal with the potential influx of undead and ghosts, and the half-bloods were ready, despite their lack of magical prowess. Even some of the humans had armed themselves with iron, ready to fight. Good, because the supernaturals couldn't defend the whole realm alone. We outnumbered them collectively, but the Shifters, one of the largest groups, had ignored our invitations to fight at our side. Going on their territory was a risky move, but nobody came this close to the ley line, not since several Shifters had died in a battle here, orchestrated by the Lady of the Tree. The house, which had once belonged to Vance's Uncle Wyatt, lay empty. He'd been forced to move after the Dragon Shifter's awakening in his back garden killed the defenses around his house. Vance's extended family were at a safe house. In fact, he'd actually arranged for them to be moved to the Necromancer Guild. Pity I hadn't got to see Wyatt's reaction to that. I wouldn't put it past Theon to find more ways to target the people I cared about, and that included Vance's uncle and his wife and daughter, who'd shunned the Majors and wanted nothing to do with them. The ley line wouldn't be visible if not for the jagged hole in the ground, several 100 feet wide, and surrounded by chunks of broken iron nobody had been able to move back into the hole. They'd been left here as a reminder that some forces were stronger even than fairies. A god who could break through iron like it was nothing wasn't someone I wanted to cross. One of the main reasons I'd put him back to sleep after the lady had woken him up. And now I was about to undo that spell. Vance swept me into his arms and kissed me, and I enjoyed the brief moment his strong arms wrapped around me. Then I pulled both of us over the veil. I expected resistance. I didn't get it. Grey smoke swallowed us up, and the next second we landed on the path of the veil, a thick layer of fallen leaves under our feet. "Okay," I said quietly. "My realm-crossing ability works as normal. Let's see." I drew my blade, which instantly lit up in blue light. Relief warred with suspicion, and then dread as anger rang through my veins. Fury lit up my sword in a brighter shade, a visceral jolt of burning anger I associated with one individual. Theon was here. Vance saw my alarm and quietly withdrew his own iron sword.
"Where?"
I shook my head. "Not sure. Left or right?" I stopped. Wait a second. I'd overlooked the obvious. Transferring Helena to my other hand, I reached across my back and drew the life drinker from its sheath. Then I tapped into its magic. Green light flared across the blade, and its humming drowned out my other sword. You know where to go, I murmured to the sword. Take me to your owner, preferably not via Fion, if you can. He must know I'd taken the sword back by now. He was definitely here in this realm, but whether he'd been behind the issues in the mortal one, or whether I'd caused them myself when I broke the cauldron, I hadn't a clue. Vance watched the sword, a frown on his face, as I turned left down the path. What? I asked, when he didn't stop staring.
Nothing.
He shook his head.
The power in the sword belongs to the god, correct?
Yeah, I said, wondering where he was going with this.
It's not my power, nor the others in that shifter bloodline. Shifters don't have magic.
Oh, yeah. Vance was indirectly descended from the dragon shifter, but a few 100,000 years back. Huh. Good point. Does your mage blood cancel it out?
Perhaps, but I'd have thought I would have heard if my father or uncle had the ability to drain the life out of someone. My grandmother didn't either.
Maybe the power gets diluted with each generation, I said. The she thinks so anyway. That's why Avocus was never going to accept his son. He was half-blood. Without the immortality, you lose what it means to be a she. They have a fixation on bloodlines. I don't know if the gods are the same. Vance looked at the sword, then back at me.
The gods are immortal too. Shifters certainly aren't. Maybe we're more like the fairies than we think.
I reckon there's more fairy blood in the mortal realm than anyone thought, I said. It's not just the half-bloods. I stopped as we rounded a corner and came across a giant construction blocking the path. Grey as stone, yet stronger. I'd made the dungeon out of the same reinforced ash as the talisman. The threads of green light from the life drinker crept along the ground and slid up the walls of the structure. A door appeared in the back, wreathed in green light. Okay. Damn. Didn't expect to find it so soon. I retrieved the invocation paper from my pocket. If the dragon attacks, get out.
No,
said Vance. I looked at him. Is that it? No? That's your argument?
I think it suffices.
Cooperate with me, Vance. I'm not letting you die here because you refuse to run away from a dire situation.
I rather hope you plan to make use of those powerful words in your hand before such a thing happens.
Yeah, well, the gods invented this language. Vance's mouth tightened.
Let's get this done. I'll watch outside. If you need my help, ask.
And if you see Fion, call me, I said, already pushing on the door. It didn't open. I pushed again. No reaction. Had I locked myself out? Wait. I'd used the combined power of both swords to create this place. Maybe I needed them both to get back inside. Doubly glad I'd retrieved the life drinker, I let magic from both hands flow into me. Magic of pain and magic of life. Green and blue energy swirling around me in a turquoise vortex. As soon as the magic touched the door, it opened, revealing the dragon, curled up exactly where I'd left it. Impossibly huge, it filled the space within the dungeon easily. Black scales covered its body, wings were bunched behind its back, and its head rested on clawed hands. Holy crap. My heart drummed in my ears. I didn't even know where to begin with waking the creature up. I looked properly at the invocation sheet. Words skimmed through my mind. One of them would be the reversal of the spell I'd put the dragon under, surely. Or maybe just using magic would work, as the Lady of the Tree had done. She'd used both summer and winter magic at the same time, stealing my own power to do it. But I didn't want to create a magical beacon that would draw everyone here. Wait. It hadn't just been magic she'd used. Her talisman had actually belonged to the god. Or the magic inside it had. Maybe being near its own magic had been enough to wake it. I debated, then put the invocations away, switching Helena to my left hand and holding the life drinker in my right. Green magic swirled around it, eagerly, reaching out to its former master. I froze as the dragon moved, its huge eye flickering. Maybe not. Backing away, I stopped inside the entrance. The dragon's eye opened, grey, sharp, and instantly locked onto me. Chapter 13. Hi, I said. The dragon's teeth snapped, inches from me. Chains on the wall yanked it back before it could bite me. Okay, this is a bad idea, Ivy. Don't, I said. I'm Ivy. I'm here to ask for your help, and... The dragon roared, and the whole dungeon trembled. My body shook, my eardrums vibrating until I heard and felt nothing else but the primal noise that erupted from the dragon's throat. Vance grabbed onto me from behind, steadying me. The dragon's teeth snapped at me again, catching the edge of the life drinker. Oh. You want this? I asked. Someone had clearly taken some of the beast's power. I doubted the dragon had given it up willingly. Life drinker. If the sword could drain the life out of someone, God only knew what the dragon could do. But I laid the sword down carefully. The dragon watched me, then lunged forward. Chains snapped again, and its teeth closed around the sword. Green light enveloped the room, dazzling me. The world swayed, not unlike when summer was working its magic. I squeezed my eyes shut against the glare, hoping I hadn't made a fatal error. I opened my eyes. A man lay across from me, face down and clothed in black. I screamed, cutting off the noise immediately. The air shimmered, and he stood in a whirl of green light. His arresting grey eyes hit me first, leaving me reeling. Okay, he has the fear ability too. But he was neither Seelie nor unseelie, though the talisman was Seelie's. The god was a shapeshifter. Obviously. Shapeshifter fairies were hardly uncommon. Fae gods who could shift form were perfectly logical too, considering Fion had been in beast form the last time I'd seen him. Except when this particular god had been put to sleep, he'd been in the form of a dragon. So he'd shifted back into human form, and... Oh no. He'd been stuck underground in our realm, or in the Between realm, at least 1,000 years or so. Maybe longer. That meant communication might be tricky, to say the least. If I ever remembered how to speak again. Grey-green light rose from the ground, burning the inside of my eyelids. I blinked, accidentally looking up at him. His body was cloaked in black armor edged with silver. It was hard to determine exactly what he looked like, aside from the eyes. He flickered around the edges. An illusion? Or was he like the she? Too much for a mortal mind to comprehend? Most likely, yes. He came from a time before the she, and was powerful enough that they'd exiled him from their realm. I swallowed against my dry throat. Sorry to disturb you. No reply. My sword glowed, the symbols pulsing. Invocations. A language from the time of the gods, like the magic inside my talisman. I swallowed again, reluctant to speak aloud. Invocations were like an ancient fairy language, so logically he was more likely to be able to understand me if I spoke in that tongue than modern English. But if I wasn't careful, I'd speak and cause unwanted real-world side effects. The man spoke in a deep, rumbling voice. I shook my head. No translator. Come on, magic. If you can wake a god, you can at least speak to him. I'm Ivy, I said again. I'm human. Can't speak fairy. Or whatever language he spoke. The shifter gods were vaguely related to the fairies, right? Distantly. They belonged to another time. They must speak some form of language related to the invocations. I held up the sheet with shaking hands. Can you read this? He spoke a single word. The paper rippled in my hands. I gasped aloud as the words changed, and the meaning slid through my head. I looked up at him again. What was that?
I would not invoke our tongue again, human, unless you have very good reason for it.
His rumbling voice made my whole body shake. Oh boy. Either he'd just learned English, or he'd used magic on me so we could communicate with one another. Either might be true, and we had no time to waste. I need your help. Life Drinker, whatever your name is.
Life Drinker, he repeated. The name is Voron, human, and I do not take kindly to being imprisoned underground.
We're not really underground, though I wished I was anywhere but here. I don't know who originally imprisoned you in the liminal space near the mortal realm, but it wasn't me.
You maintained my prison.
He stepped forward. This time my gaze managed to stay on his face. He had sharp features, with pointed ears like the she did. He looked more she than human, handsome in a disturbingly alien way. You wouldn't cooperate, so I had to. My own realm was under threat.
A danger I know very well, human. But it won't help you now. Every kingdom falls.
My heart lurched. Look, I know I just woke you, and I'm sorry I trapped you here, but I seriously need your help. There's a wannabe god named the Huntsman running around, and if I don't stop him, he'll destroy both the human and the fairy realms. If I hadn't come here, he'd have reached you first.
The ancients are not what they were,
growled the dragon shifter.
Nor will they ever be again. The she took what we were for their own and sealed us away. I was the last of them.
So you knew the others? I asked. Did you know the Huntsman? Probably not. He'd claimed his power after the Grey Veil's creation, which had been for the purpose of imprisoning the original gods. But I didn't yet know whether the living embodiment of the Life Drinker's sword had been one of those gods. What was clear was that he'd fathered the shifter's ancestors, at least within this part of the country. But if he was the last of his kind, the others must be dead or missing.
I am not one of the Fae, nor do I belong to their courts.
I looked at the talisman. But your power is from summer, right? He regarded me with his head tilted on one side.
No.
What? This talisman came from summer. It has your power inside it.
It had,
he corrected.
I took it back to change forms.
Damn, he was right. The talisman no longer glowed green, not even the glyphs on the hilt. It didn't contain the power of the god any longer.
The blade was forged in summer,
he said.
The Seelie court set so much by their devotion to nature, yet they willingly cut down their own trees to use as vessels for power.
You're going to tell us off about destroying the forests? I asked, completely thrown off. Tell Summer that, not me. I don't know why they put your power in a sword.
For status, of course,
the shifter god said.
I was still awake when they did it. I remember seeing the dryad who'd once belonged to the tree they cut down to forge that blade. I remember her screaming.
What? I said stupidly. The dryad? Oh my God. Not the lady of the tree. They cut down her tree to make the talisman.
Well,
crap. No wonder she'd been ready to reclaim the talisman as hers. And if those dryads I'd encountered in summer had been right, she'd gone after the person who'd cut her tree down for revenge and got herself exiled for it. This had probably been way before the invasion, so she'd had centuries to hone her anger. What the hell kind of monsters were the she?
I do not know how the fairies operate, growled the dragon. Despite what you may believe, we are not the same.
Okay, so someone took the power from you. Then they exiled you here.
They tried.
He bared his teeth in a grim smile.
I came to the mortal realm instead, but I was exposed for what I am and left to sleep for eternity.
Damn, I said. You're the shifter's ancestor, right? As fascinated as I was, we still had a war out there. And now I'd lost one of my talismans. I'd damn well better gain the cooperation of the one who carried it.
Shifters,
he repeated.
Yes, I suppose I am.
The dragon's gaze moved to Vance, a frown on his face. The resemblance wasn't too obvious, aside from the eyes, but recognition flared in the shifter's gaze.
Who are you? Mage Lord Colton.
Shock and anger crossed the dragon's face.
That's what became of my progeny. They intermingled with the bastard traitors to the ancients.
Oh boy. Vance, why the hell did you say you were one of the mages? This guy didn't like humans.
Times change.
Vance met his gaze and didn't look away.
And it happens we may have need of your people again. My people,
repeated the shifter.
What did I just say? I'm the last of them.
But I have this. I held out my other talisman. It contains the power of another god. Is it possible?
They're all lost,
growled the man, in a disconcertingly dragon-like manner.
If anything remains of them, they are incapable of helping you. What do you want from me?
Like I said, there's another god trying to destroy all the realms, I said. He's immortal, immune to all magic, and if I don't stop him, we all die.
My kin are gone,
said the dragon.
Whatever you face, he is no god.
No, but he made himself one, I said. He was the leader of the Wild Hunt, an immortal. He secretly gathered an army of exiled fairies and gave them talismans like this one, and he attacked the mortal world using another talisman, the Ring of Summer. His expression was blank.
I have been imprisoned a long time, mortal. These talismans, if I'm guessing correctly, came about when fools decided to sample some of the power of the gods.
Yeah, that's about right, I said. But Theon, the huntsman, he stole those talismans for himself. That's how he nearly destroyed our realm. Is there a way to beat an immortal who's immune to all magic I use on him?
If you're mortal, as your manner suggests, then no. Who chose you as worthy to speak the words of the gods?
I did, I said. I stole this talisman from someone else, and magic came along for the ride. I don't suppose you've heard of Lord Avokis.
I am not of the court,
growled the dragon.
If you're suggesting I fight on the side of the mortals who polluted my bloodline and imprisoned me, and the she who stole our power to mock and control us, you're mistaken. If one of their own betrayed them and stole the power back, they will fall, as they rightfully deserve.
Maybe they do, but innocent people are going to get caught up in this.
So you'd sacrifice the lives of your own children on a battlefield they never asked for?
Asked Vance.
Neither of you have the faintest idea who you are talking to, do you?
Snarled the dragon.
Allow me to give you a lesson, since your knowledge is apparently lacking. Faerie is not limited to the courts, though their magic has shaped their realm so that the Seelie and Unseelie courts are central. But there are many other lands that do not belong to summer or winter. The land where their gods dwelt is just one of those, but they turned our own magic against us and used it to rip our land out by the roots and cast it into the abyss. They did not succeed. This place was created instead, a place not quite in Faerie, not quite elsewhere. They wiped out all magic from here and left only the dead, the lost.
I know, I said. It wasn't right, but believe me, the She aren't on our side at all. They don't care if we die. Whatever grudge you have against the She, our lives are all at risk because of what they did. Look, I gave you your talisman back. I'll even set you free if you promise not to kill any innocent people, but I really need your help. Fionn practically has control over life and death.
I sincerely doubt it,
said the shifter, entirely unaffected by my outburst.
If that's what passes for immortality in this day and age, the She will die out sooner rather than later.
What do you mean? I asked. The cauldron, right? The source of their immortality? Yeah, I destroyed it. If that's not proof I'm not on their side, I don't know what is. A pause. The dragon shifter looked at me. I shifted as his steely gaze passed over me, the air rippling as my mind tried to focus on him. It was no use. His aura of power was too great for me to look at him properly for long.
You lie, human. The fact that you claimed a talisman suggests you're foolish enough to meddle in forces that don't belong to you.
I used this. I lifted the invocation sheet. The cauldron was a regular talisman. I used the word for break to shatter it. You know I can speak these words. I used one on you.
Yes,
he said.
You did. You really mean to say that you broke the absurd immortality cycle the courts have worshipped for eons?
I guess I am, yeah. My heartbeat quickened, but I didn't look away.
You used our language,
said the shifter.
Those words are not used lightly, not even by the She, because they know that we can sense when someone speaks our name. Oh, we are not allowed into the courts any longer. But here, in this realm, speaking the name of a god will draw its attention, whatever form it exists in.
Whoa. Shit. But that meant the names of the gods were in my hands right now. If I spoke the right word, maybe the one whose power resided in my talisman would answer. I stared at him. Okay, so I can call the gods. Can you give me tips on how to—
No!
The word was a command, and a roar, and stopped my breath.
I will not teach you how to speak the language we created, and the She corrupted. They might hoard their knowledge, but we remember where they stole it from.
I didn't know that.
There are always fools who think they have the right to usurp our power. The Sidhe drained all magic from this part of their world deliberately. They wanted us to expire.
Shit. I didn't know that either. If it had taken all the energy in the life drinker for him just to shift forms, would he even be able to turn back? This realm was friendlier to death magic, to winter than summer. But he's from neither winter nor summer. Maybe it was the Sidhe who'd put the conditions on the talisman, fixed it so that life gave it power, and the only way to recharge it was to take life. It probably wouldn't be necessary to kill to use it in summer, where life energy fueled the very world. But the Sidhe probably hadn't thought Fion would steal it. The Sidhe, arrogant enough to store the power of the gods in pretty talismans for show, would pay the price for their mistakes. I didn't blame the dragon shifter for hating them. But that didn't mean I'd let innocent people suffer as a consequence. There was a crunching noise somewhere behind me, like feet stepping on leaves. My heart sank. There's someone outside. The dragon shifter waved a hand, and the dungeon vanished. He could rearrange the world too, apparently. The path reappeared underneath our feet, and Vance and I stepped back. Just as the dragon shifter collapsed, blood spraying out from a wound in his chest. I raised my sword, shock and panic setting in a second too late. "Ivy!" Vance shouted as the ground rocked under our feet. The air thickened with grey smoke. I shoved the invocations one-handedly into my pocket and conjured a magical shield around Vance and me. He stared around, anger crossing his face, at the sight of the ghosts rising from the smoke. Hundreds of them, grasping at us with hands human and otherwise. The half-bloods who'd been left behind when the cauldron shattered. I held my sword up in warning, which glowed bright with death energy. Then the Morrigan landed on the path. I should have known. I'd banished her, and now she was back for revenge. But she hadn't been the one to attack the dragon shifter. I couldn't see him now. The dead floated in the way, surrounding both of us. Vance snarled, his claws out. The Morrigan was in crow form, big enough to rival even the dragon. Her cruel talons waited to pull out my soul. Luckily, magic gave me a boost, and the dead waited to lend me their power. I blasted her with magic, which she dodged. Vance disappeared and reappeared behind her, throwing a knife at her. Before it connected, the dead swarmed him. I shouted his name, my heart sinking. Vance's ability didn't work to its full extent in this realm. The Morrigan reached for him. "Don't you dare!" I pulled the ghost's pain into me and launched myself at her, slamming into her body from the side. As she flailed, I stabbed her wing joint. In other winged fairies, it was the weak spot. She screamed, loudly. Not quite on a banshee's level, but enough to make my ears burn. The Morrigan's scream turned to a murderous cry. She couldn't die. Like the banshee, she'd only be reborn again. But I'd take every small advantage. The knife I'd thrown at her reappeared in my hand, as Vance sank his claws into her from behind. "This one's soul was meant to be mine," she growled, and her guttural voice sounded downright terrifying coming from a giant crow. "Not if I can help it." She threw Vance to the side, and he managed to land on his feet. I couldn't see if she was wounded, but she was a death goddess, and freakishly strong. The iron link on her ankle must bind her to Fion somehow. He was stronger than her. But why serve him in the first place, if he wouldn't let her take the souls he owed her? I threw a handful of energy at her. My magic bounced off the Morrigan's chest. Bloody unpredictable gods. My next attack fizzled out too. My magic was fueled by death energy, so I supposed it was natural that it wouldn't work against someone who is the embodiment of death herself, but I growled in frustration. If an invocation had banished her from the mortal world, Then all I needed was to get hold of the paper, and I'd be able to use a more permanent one here.
Ivy Lane, croaked the Morrigan. Your soul will do instead.
Bite me. I readied myself to yank the invocations from my pocket the second she looked away. Why are you working with these half-blood ghosts? I thought you wanted to devour them.
I will get my price, Ivy, she hissed. This one escaped, and he won't do so again.
She grabbed for Vance, who struck back with his own claws, using his ability to dodge her swiping talons. Without warning, the ghosts disappeared as the ground lurched underneath my feet. I gasped as my magic reacted violently to such a surge of energy. My spirit was wrenched from my body. I fell forwards, feeling no pain as my knees hit the floor, and ghosts whirled around my ghostly form, grabbing for me. Vance shouted my name, but the ground moved again. I hadn't imagined it. The whole realm was changing, or at least the part of it we were in. Even the Morrigan had disappeared. The dragon shifter lay on the ground, blood spreading around him. Vance held onto a tree for balance, and immediately let go as it transformed, turning clear, like ice, flowing across the ground, engulfing every tree. Some turned into sculptures, others were coated in frost. Winter magic had hit, along with a blast of death magic strong enough to tear me from my body. What the hell had happened to drag this much winter magic into the realm where there wasn't supposed to be any magic at all? Obviously, Theon happened. I fought the pull of death, grasping at my body and managing to reconnect. I staggered to my feet, fighting against the powerful current of cold winter air.
That wasn't part of our agreement, said Theon's voice, addressing the Morrigan.
Chapter 14. I knew it. I knew he was here. Coldness spread through me. I stumbled forwards, my hands numbing. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees. It wouldn't take much more for Vance and me to freeze to death. We were still human, magic or none. Theon appeared, sitting astride his dark-pelted horse. So he was playing huntsman, not shapeshifter. That magic, though. I hadn't seen it from him before. He'd frozen this entire area of the Grey Veil. He has someone from Winter on his side. Someone powerful. Theon waved a hand, and warmth circled me, like a fire had been lit nearby. Vance stepped forward, his claws sliding out.
"What's your game?" he demanded.
"This is no game," said Theon.
"I made the mistake of not taking you humans seriously before, or your endless capacity to run yourselves into fatal errors. As amusing as it would be to watch you struggle, I can't afford to bet against you any longer. You've done too much damage already."
"If you mean killing your pet she, you shouldn't have handed the life drinker to a 12-year-old with a god complex." I glanced at the dragon shifter. No human could lose that much blood and survive for long. I didn't know the rules on gods, or if they were any different to the she, but maybe even a healing spell wouldn't work.
"The life drinker was expendable," Theon said dismissively. "I had to find some way to divert your attention."
I knew it. If Theon hadn't been at the castle, he'd have good reason. Not that it helped to know I'd been right. What army had he gathered this time? He already had all the exiles, a bunch of reborn she, and God knew how many ghosts at his beck and call, and his horsemen of the apocalypse. Sure, he'd lost his hellhounds, but I hadn't the faintest idea where they'd scattered to after I'd broken the cauldron.
"This is very enlightening," growled Vance. "But if you mean to attack our realm again, you won't find it undefended. What makes you think I would waste any more time on you?"
Theon's head tilted on one side.
You brought your mage along for the ride, even though you know this realm is a poison to him. Mortals never cease to confuse me, but you're far too late. Your realm will fall, but as a side effect. Whether you defend it or not, the outcome will be the same.
Side effect, I said.
The realms are all intertwined. What happens to one affects the others.
You do realize if you screw up all the realms, you'll die, don't you? I inched closer to Vance, trying to keep Theon's attention on my face. I was under no illusions that either of us would be able to harm Theon as he was now, but our only ally on the same power level as Theon was bleeding out on the ground.
Don't worry about me.
Theon's mouth curled in a smile.
The fairy realms are more resilient than yours is, more so than their inhabitants.
He looked at the shifter god, and my heart sank. He'd gone completely still, and I couldn't tell if he was breathing. Vance edged to the side, away from me. What was he planning?
Even gods can die.
Theon laughed, turning back to face me as though the dying shifter wasn't worthy of his attention anymore. Including you. I glared at him, trying to keep his focus on my face. Vance continued to move closer to the dragon shifter. Not that you're a real god. You just pretended to be one after you fled the courts.
I never fled them.
His eyes narrowed.
I am the only one to walk away from the courts on my own power and take what was mine.
You killed the real huntsman, I said. Right? You stole his magic so you could cross realms.
Ah, you spoke to...
He looked at me questioningly. A flash of light behind him indicated Vance had managed to use a healing spell on the shifter god. Theon didn't turn around. His eyes were on me. Nobody, I said. I worked it out. Nice going, by the way. The court will have your head on a platter. A smile curled his lips.
The court were foolish enough not to see me for what I am. A god.
Oh, here we go. I rolled my eyes. How are you getting on without the cauldron? His mouth twisted.
If subduing Faerie wasn't central to my plan, I'd dearly love to see what the Winter Queen would do to you for destroying her chances of living forever. I am far from the only person in Faerie with such ambitions, but we all know how this ends. I'm sure the shifter's ancestor told you the same. The gods thought they would rule forever. The Sidhe proved them wrong. The Sidhe themselves thought they would rule forever, and...
Theon's horse tipped backwards as a knife buried itself in his shoulder. Vance appeared behind me, grabbing my arm to pull me out of Theon's path and next to the dragon shifter, who was stirring.
No!
Theon's voice was a clap of thunder that shook the world again. I reached for Vance, but the dungeon had already vanished, as had the trees, leaving darkness behind. Vance? I called into the dark.
This way,
said a sing-song voice. A light appeared in the dark, floating above Theon as he sat on his horse a few meters away. I glared. Like I'd follow you anywhere. What the hell did you just pull?
I decided we might better talk in a place equipped more effectively for conversation.
A dark tunnel? Yeah, nice try. Where the hell is Vance?
Don't worry about him, Ivy. Worry about yourself. The shadows are hungry for blood.
The ground shifted under my feet. I moved automatically, and something soft brushed the back of my neck. I gritted my teeth, fighting the instinct to panic and run. Theon was probably bullshitting me to get that exact reaction. Apparently, he'd decided to employ some of Faerie's standard tricks. I walked leisurely towards him, hands clenched around my sword hilt, determined not to flinch or betray any signs of weakness. Lousy effort, Fionn. The shadows receded, and the ground beneath turned to grass. Frozen grass, that is. The chilly air brushed against my skin all over, and my teeth started chattering. Also, this isn't a better place for conversation. It's fucking freezing. Where the hell did you take Vance?
Wouldn't you like to know?
His teeth flashed in a wide smile. I wanted to punch him in the nose. I could do him physical damage, but he'd just heal himself. Losing the cauldron hadn't taken away his invincibility. I kept my gaze on Fionn, but studied the surroundings out of the corner of my eye. We stood in a clearing surrounded by trees, all covered in a layer of frost. Grass crunched under my feet. Beyond the trees, I glimpsed another path leading uphill, and the shadow of a large structure. Not the castle Vance had been imprisoned in last time, but a similar one. Oh no, I wasn't playing these games again. Did you decide to steal from the She's rulebook? I'd have thought you'd try something more original.
Don't worry, Ivy, he said softly. It'll become clear in time.
Okay, now you're stealing from the cliché villains rulebook too?
Perhaps, said Fionn. But it's working, isn't it?
Pissing me off? Yeah, the She did that too. Next, it'll be pretty ballrooms with a human band cursed to play until they die, while you waltz around beheading people for looking at you the wrong way.
Avocus did that, Fionn laughed. He did have a certain taste, or lack thereof.
We can agree there, but that doesn't mean I'll play along. Tell me what you want with me. If you want to fight, I'll do it here and now. If you don't plan to attack my realm, then what? At least you've learned your lesson about screwing with the witches.
You're right, he said.
What?
You're right that targeting the mortal realm should never have been my priority. I've learned from my mistakes, Ivy. Where do you think we are?
By your new palace?
We aren't in the Vale any longer, Ivy. We're in my new realm, the first of many.
New realm? No way. This must be part of winter, which meant he'd decided to attack Faerie first after all.
The She made a grave error in separating their territory, he said. In time, all the magic of summer and winter will flood the realm they left to die. But for now, I have claimed the Court of Death as mine.
Court of Death? The Morrigan? The Death Omens? Even the Hellhounds? They all came from here. And if you had power over death, even the She might not be able to stand up to it. So you're sucking all the power from death over here? Even from the mortal world?
As I said, he whispered, there are side effects.
Holy fuckballs. I believed him. If he'd hijacked Winter's death magic for his own, enough to affect even the mortal realm, then he was draining Winter dry as we spoke. I almost hoped he'd left Vance behind in the Vale, because survival was more likely there. But then he couldn't get back to the mortal realm without me. But he'd been with the Dragon Shifter. I was on my own. Except for... Did he seriously bring me here, knowing I carry a talisman that's powered by death and pain? He did know, which meant that giving me an advantage didn't scare him.
It takes time to build an empire, Fionn said. Come with me.
He turned around, and the trees moved aside at a wave of his hand, revealing a path uphill towards his new palace. It gleamed under a silvery moon, as though made out of glass or ice. Probably the latter. Wow. I shook my head at him. You know, you might be a power-hungry, warmongering dick, Theon, but I always thought you weren't like them. The She. You might have hated Avocus, but you're more like him than you'd like to pretend. Hot breath brushed the back of my neck, followed by a growl. Something huge and furred had appeared behind me. I moved aside as the creature, Chimera, growled, its foul breath buffeting me from behind. I swung around, cutting its throat in one swift retaliation. Blue-tinged blood flew, staining the snowy ground. A choked roar escaped its throat as it sank to its knees. Nice try. I moved out of the way as blood seeped out from underneath its heavy body. I'm sure Winter will be thrilled that you're bringing fire-breathing wild beasts into their forests.
Not as thrilled as Winter's foot soldiers, Theon said.
Use that resourceful mortal mind of yours, Ivy. Excuse me? Wait a second. You didn't. A yowl came from the trees, followed by the sound of 1,000 small footsteps.
It was you who spilled blood on the Redcap's territory, Ivy. You might mock me for following the example of the She, but it works, does it not?
I conjured a handful of blue magic and threw it at Theon. It rebounded, hitting the nearest tree. Taking the chance, I grabbed my invocations, and the world distorted. Instead of darkness, the shape of a large hall closed in. The ceiling was impossibly high, and a thin ribbon of moonlight shone through the center, illuminating the dark figures crowding around the edge of an arena. I stood in the center, Theon at the side, and the fallen Chimera in front of me. The footsteps didn't cease, but grew louder as the crowd converged on the fallen Chimera and me. Hands grabbed at me, yanking me off my feet. I swore and threw a handful of magic into the crowd, but the blue light was swallowed up in darkness. A word bellowed out, sharp and sudden, sending me reeling sideways. My ears rang, and only years of ingrained instinct stopped me from falling into the path of an oncoming horde of redcaps. I swung my blade, burying it in a redcap's skull, but thousands of them tore at my clothes, sharp nails scoring lines across my skin. What had he said? An invocation. Theon spoke an invocation. Light revealed him as my head surged above the crowd of redcaps. Theon remained astride his horse, looking almost bored, and holding the invocation sheet. He'd bound my magic. I couldn't feel it any longer, despite all the pain and death energy in the room. Even my sword no longer glowed. I tugged it out of the redcap's head, crawling to the surface, slashing at any hands that grabbed at me. Even without my magic, my sword was sharper than any mortal blade, but there were too many of them to hit at once. And Vance was across from me, fighting too. No. No! Get out! I screamed. Theon had pulled the most obvious of fairy tricks. Apparently he'd stolen more than the Winter She's death magic. He'd stolen their illusions too. On either side of him were horses bearing masked figures in armor. The horsemen of the Wild Hunt, blocking every exit. Vance snarled, tearing into the redcaps, but he was bleeding from long scratches on his face, and if he hadn't used his ability already, Theon must have stopped him from teleporting out. I needed to reach him first. We'd take down Theon somehow. But getting those invocations back was paramount. They were all I had left. Kicking a redcap aside, I dug one-handed in my pocket, nearly getting myself brained in the process. But my hand closed around the small jar hidden alongside my spare dagger. I ripped it free and tossed it into the crowd. Glass shattered, and 1,000 redcap screams tore at my eardrums as they walked right into the iron filings I'd scattered under their feet. Simple works best, eh, Theon? He glared as I met his eyes, focusing on the invocations as I moved forward. Vance did so too, but the tide of redcaps seemed never-ending. Theon had set this up on purpose, and probably killed a bunch of people to bait them. Redcaps were battlefield fairies, and the arena under our feet was stained in blood. You're even stealing Calder's ideas now! My words went unheard. From the sting of wounds, my healing ability was having trouble keeping up with the redcaps, but Vance was having a worse time of it than I was. He had no healing spells. I ran towards him instead of Theon as the redcaps swarmed him. You were supposed to stay by the iron! I cut down a redcap before its grasping fingers gouged my eyes out. As though I'd be anywhere but at your side, he said. Blood streamed down his face, but his eyes gleamed with a fierce light as he killed 2 redcaps simultaneously. That's when the floor split in 2. Vance on one side, me on the other. The redcaps continued to snarl and grab for anything living, even each other, stabbing with short knives and gouging with pointy fingers. But it was Theon who stole my attention as he rode the horse through the gap in the floor and grabbed for me. I blocked him with my sword, but the tide of redcaps pushed at me, relentless, until I dangled over the gap in the floor. Irritation at Theon's use of another cheap trick was swallowed by fear as my body trembled over the ledge. If I fell, no magic would save me. He didn't need me alive. He never had. I was entertainment to him, and splitting me up from Vance was a calculated act. Vance watched me, fighting the tide of redcaps, an expression of horror on his face. He'd sustained several stab wounds already, and panic gripped me when I saw the amount of blood staining his clothes. He'd bleed out if he wasn't careful. Don't bother, whispered Theon, grabbing me by the scruff of my neck. I kicked frantically, but with no result. You're dead, Ivy. But you get to choose who dies first. You or him? Absolutely not, I said. God damn him. He might try the cheapest tricks in Faerie, but they worked. I wouldn't sacrifice Vance's life, but he couldn't get out of here without me. Him then. The redcaps lifted Vance to the surface as 3 more horsemen parted the crowd, each armed with a cruel-looking spear. No! I screamed. Kill me first! Please, not him! Anything but this. Theon watched me, not speaking. His magic brushed across my back, a sharp line of blue energy. My own magic should have responded, but it didn't. He seemed different to last time. Sharper, but somehow less distinct, like being touched by both summer and winter at once. But I forgot all about that, as 3 spears pierced the air at impossible speeds. The redcap stopped moving. I didn't. I wriggled free of Theon and leaped for the gap in the floor, as though the air would catch me and make me fly. I began to fall the second Vance dodged the first spear. The second caught him in the arm, pinning him to the ground. The third hit him in the heart. I screamed. The air didn't catch me, and oblivion beckoned as the lights went out, and I fell into the black. Chapter 15. I didn't expect to wake up. I didn't want to wake up. But I did. Apparently, the abyss had spat me out, because here I was, lying on an unbearably soft bed in a room with a proper fireplace burning slowly in front of me. An elaborately decorated room, which mocked me with its fitted mahogany furniture and gold-leaf patterned wallpaper. No window, of course. No way out. I still wore my blood-stained clothes, but one quick check confirmed the contents of my pockets had been emptied. The invocations were lost. All my weapons, gone. My phone, too. Someone had even removed the spare dagger I kept in my bra. The visceral jolt of disgust that hit me at the realization opened the floodgates, I was a prisoner, at a Fae's mercy again. And Vance was dead. There was no faking it. I'd been close enough to him, for the brief moment before we'd been torn apart, to know it was really him. Fionn had planned it that way. Fionn had killed the man I loved, right in front of me. It can't be. He's not dead. I ran to the door, denial and shock warring with pure screaming rage. My fist struck the door's barred window hard enough to draw blood. A tingling sensation followed. So I could heal. I might even be able to move on superhuman speed. But it didn't matter, because my magic was gone. He'd taken my talismans and he'd ripped out my heart. Desperately, I tried to disconnect with my body and travel into death, but hit a solid barrier. My second attempt had the same result. He must have used magic on my room to keep me from escaping. He was the master of death, after all. I cursed him and hammered at the wall until my healing ability couldn't keep up with the skin being torn from my knuckles. I screamed until my throat was raw, my fists pounding the stone. Like physical pain would ease away the tearing sensation in my chest. I should have been able to knock the whole place down with all the pain I'd gathered. But not as long as Fionn was here. Vance. I never should have brought him here. Oh, who was I kidding? He'd never have consented to be left behind. The mages and witches would lead the fight if Fionn did show his hand there. But it wasn't our realm that interested him anymore. He'd killed the whole of Faerie first, and thought of us only as a side effect. And I'd waste away my remaining time here, unless something resembling a miracle showed up right about now. Even death couldn't come in here, so asking, or pleading with the dead was out of the question. If Vance was on the other side of the veil, I couldn't reach him. My hands tore at the door, blood staining the wooden surface. But still, nothing. I didn't even know how long I'd been unconscious. The sensible part of me whispered that using up all my energy on futile escape attempts would only make it harder to fight. Can't make it harder than it already is. Fionn had employed Faerie's dirtiest tricks to break me. I'd scheme until I found a way to snatch victory out from underneath his nose. But right now, mourning consumed me, ate away at my resolve. He'd killed Vance to shatter my hope. But knowing that didn't make the bleeding stop, didn't seal the hole in my heart. I cried until the minutes blended together, until oblivion crashed down on me again, and I fell into blissful unconsciousness. It didn't last long enough. I woke with my head throbbing and my mouth dry. I needed water. Pain didn't take away survival instincts. Apparently, I needed to relearn all my old lessons. There was a bathroom at the side, equipped with a proper shower. Faerie had upgraded, apparently. As a Vocus's prisoner, we had to bathe in the river and hope nothing came and ate us. I glared at the fancy gold-plated fittings and drank straight out the tap. Water splashed onto the floor. I didn't bother to mop it up. The mirror above the sink showed what a mess I was. My eyes were puffy and red. Hell, my whole face was. I didn't care. Nor did I care for the clothes someone had left on the side. I wouldn't go to my death cosplaying as a fairy warrior. I'd go as me. Fionn wouldn't take away who I was, even if he'd taken away my heart. Apparently, he'd forgotten that I'd fought on with no hope for 3 years and survived. For all his tales of being mistreated by Winter, I suspected it wasn't the case at all. He had the manner of someone used to getting whatever he wanted. All the Sidhe were like that. Being exiled might be a traumatic experience, but they'd all deserved it, and then some. None of them knew what it was like, to be stolen away from everything you loved. To be thrown as low as it was possible to go, and yet to find a light in the dark to follow anyway. Maybe that's why I didn't want to die. Not even with him gone. I counted seconds, waiting for the door to open. It had to eventually. Someone would come to feed me, or Fionn would come to mock me. The moment he did, I'd be out of here or dead. The instant the door finally began to open, I launched across the room, slamming into Fionn with such force something cracked in my arm. I bit down on a scream, knowing that if the sound escaped, I'd start bawling again. Over my dead body. Literally, if necessary. Fuck you! I tore at him with my free hand as Fionn didn't move. He blocked the entire doorway, and I couldn't get past his armor, not even to see what was outside. Icy air blew in from somewhere, hitting me like a slap in the face. Fighting him wouldn't help me now. I doubted bargaining would either, and I'd rather cut off my own hand than pretend to play nice with the bastard who'd killed Vance. He'd wanted to break me, yet he hadn't taken my life. He must have some fresh horrors saved up for me. Fionn looked calmly at me, at the bloodstains on the floor from where I'd hit the door.
There's no need to take your rage out on the carpets, Ivy.
Rage, I repeated, my voice husky from screaming. You haven't seen anything yet, Fionn. Tell me what the fuck you want, or I'll run into your sword and take away all the fun you plan to have with me.
You think this is fun? Asked Fionn.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe you enjoyed feeling me up when you were taking away my weapons.
You flatter yourself, human. I didn't lay a finger on you.
What the hell does that mean? I should be flattered you didn't violate me while I was unconscious.
That would spoil the fun.
He laughed as I glared at him.
Humans are so fragile, so breakable. I confess it would be fun to make you utterly dependent on me, as happens whenever a she chooses a human lover. Things get messy.
No kidding. Poor Laurel was proof of that. For a moment, I wished Fionn had used a forgetfulness invocation on me. Being able to forget would be a blessing right about now. No. No, it wouldn't. You said you'll never let him take away everything you are. If nothing else, Vance wouldn't want you to. My nails pierced my palms as anger and grief warred in my chest.
Do you think I didn't hear about Avakis's former lover? Did she tell you anything useful?
I shook my head, gritting my teeth. Why do you care?
I'd like to ensure there aren't any unpleasant surprises ahead. But I suspect not. Avakis was predictable to a fault, even in his choosing a human lover. I have his progeny to thank for my revival.
His teeth flashed in a grin.
It's strange how these things work, isn't it, Ivy?
Good for you. I don't want to listen to any more of this crap, Fionn. If you want to kill or maim me, get it over with. I'm through.
I suppose you are, he mused. I forget you've suffered loss before, Ivy.
And I forgot you've never cared for anyone in your life.
I beg to differ, he said. Time passes, and the losses remain with us. Some would call you fortunate, given that your time was always going to be limited.
You know, you've got to stop play-acting as one of the she, I said. Seriously, the immortality fixation is their issue. If they really enslaved you, then surely you wanted to get away from that. So you could be the only one, sitting on a throne made out of your enemy's bones without anyone left in any realm to challenge you. His gaze sharpened.
Isn't that what we all want? You carried the invocations, Ivy. You might have remade the world.
Right. I didn't even know where he was going with this. I don't care who you are or who your allies are. Is that why you can't let me go? Because you aren't used to having everyone either flee or fawn all over you? Am I getting under your skin because I don't give a shit about you? The angry line of his mouth told me I wasn't far off the mark. He might pretend not to be a she, but in the end, they were all fixated on being liked, or worshipped. But they were all deceivers, thieves even of their own magic, just like Fionn. Out of words? I asked. You were never a slave of the courts. You were one of them. And like them, your ego will be your undoing. You think you're invincible, and you're willing to drain even death dry to ensure it. But you're not. Sooner or later, you'll slip up like Avocus did. And even if I'm not there to see it, someone will be. Someone will be desperate enough to snatch your power out from underneath your nose and use it to cut your throat. Because I'm not unique, Fionn. I just got lucky. And I hope another human does too. He slapped me. The blow carried me off my feet and onto my back. The soft carpet cushioned my fall, but my face throbbed. Ow! He looked down at me, his face a war of emotions swept behind a mask. He wasn't in control. He hadn't meant to display weakness like that. You're proving how pathetic you really are. I stood up, my face tingling as the wound healed. If you were really secure in your power, you wouldn't need to strike me. It is you who should know your place, Ivy. Get on your knees. The words rang through me, and my knees bent automatically. Damned fairy magic. I couldn't even raise my head to look at him as he called to someone behind him. Bring her with me. I fought against the force that pinned my knees to the floor. By the time I'd staggered to my feet, cuffs had clamped over my wrists of their own accord. A small figure appeared in front of me, head down. A young girl with dark hair and pointed ears. A second set of cuffs appeared, chaining the pair of us together. My gaze moved to her face, and I stopped. Roseanne? What was the half-blood daughter of the Morrigan doing here? I thought she'd escaped. Come quickly, Fionn said. You don't want to miss this show. Fionn walked too quickly to keep up, even if I wasn't unbalanced from the magic he'd used on me. It was freezing, too, away from the fire. The chill wind cut into me underneath my leather jacket. I was glad I'd kept it on, because I was 90% sure I was walking to my own execution. Roseanne, I whispered. Shit, he found you. She shot me a wide-eyed look and didn't speak. Probably couldn't. He'd have her under a vow, like everyone else. It's okay, I whispered. I'm here with you. Nobody would have said that to her before. The crimes she'd committed hadn't been her own, and nobody deserved a lifetime of enslavement to a madman. There must be a way to beat him. But maybe that job wasn't for me. If nothing else, if I died today, I might see Vance again before we passed through death's gates. Together. Chapter 16. I held on to that thought as Roseanne and I walked down the dark corridor. It looked more castle-like than my room. Black stone, coldness seeping through crevices, shadows that moved in ways shadows weren't supposed to. Faerie could do whatever the hell it liked to me now. I glared at the sifting shadows, and they scuttled away. Except for one. The outline of a winged creature the size of my hand hovered over my head like a giant moth, too hidden in shadow for me to tell what it was. I glared at it warningly, and the shadows dropped onto my head, yanking at my hair. I swore and dug my heels in, causing Roseanne to turn around and shake her head frantically at me. I shrugged, tugging my hair free and walking to catch up with her and Fionn. He led me downstairs. 1 floor down, 2, 3. 3 times I lunged for the nearest door or window. 3 times Fionn slapped me back with a jolt of magic, which sent pain down to the very bone. I was limping before I reached the bottom of the stairs. It was more or less pitch black down there. Roseanne shot me a look of terror, but continued to walk alongside me, tugging me by the cuffs, her body trembling. "It's okay," I whispered. "Fionn's just trying to freak us out." "Come along," Fionn called. "Your new home awaits, Ivy." There was manic laughter in his voice, which made me want to punch him on the nose. But I couldn't see him in the dark, and it didn't hit me that he was gone until Roseanne stopped. "What is it?" No light pierced the darkness. Fionn didn't speak. Neither did Roseanne. "Where am I?" "Now you're shutting me in the dark!" Roseanne made another terrified squeaking noise. Something ran over my feet, and I jumped. Probably a mouse. Damn Fionn. He led me into a dungeon, and I let him. A minute passed. Nobody appeared. "Seriously?" I asked of thin air. "This is your new plan? Roseanne, can you speak at all?" "No," she moaned. "He's not here, but I can't speak to you." "You just did." I moved my hand. We were still cuffed to one another. "What happened? Are we underground?" She made a noise that might have been yes. "You can speak," I said. "Did he put you under a vow?" "Yes." She gulped. "It stopped working. Means he left. We're going to die." "What?" "He said I shouldn't speak to you. I'm under a vow, and when he leaves, that's when the vow stops working, and I die. This is the dungeon. There's no way out. We're gonna die." "No, we aren't." I wriggled my wrist in the handcuffs, trying to access my magic again. Still nothing. Fionn can't have left for good. He wanted to torment me. "He wanted to torment me, too," Roseanne sobbed uncontrollably. "Because my mother ruled this territory, and he took it from her." "Wait. This territory was owned by the Morrigan. I thought it belonged to the Unseelie Queen." "This is part of Winter, but not the court. My mum's a slave, and so am I." I knew he captured her. "Any idea how? Last I heard, they had an arrangement. So did you." A slap connected with my neck. "It's your fault," she cried. "He blamed you for the cauldron. You took away my chance at immortality, and he captured the Morrigan's territory because he wanted to punish me. It's all your fault, Ivy. We're gonna die because of you." "Who believed the lies of a madman? You've no idea how much I've lost. You had a choice, and you picked the fairies who abandoned you." "You bitch!" She hit me again, catching my ear instead of my face. Ow! Sharp claws raked the side of my chin. Her hands had shifted to her animal form. "Wait!" I blocked her hit. "Wait. Your hands are claws now, right? You can undo the handcuffs." "What?" "The cuffs. Can't you use your claws to pick the locks? Neither of my hands are free." She sobbed, but a clinking sound told me she'd tried to reach the cuffs. Again. It took a few minutes, but the cuffs loosened around my hands and then dropped. Thanks. I still didn't forgive her for what she'd done, but most of my anger was trained on Fionn. Now we can find our way out of this shithole. "There isn't one," she sniffed. "Really? None.
I've been here before. He locked me up for days.
Of course he did.
But there must be a door. Though if Theon had used his magic to rearrange the place again, maybe not.
It's sealed. Neither of us has our magic.
You have claws.
Seriously,
she croaked.
It won't work.
I ignored her and walked slowly, edging around the walls until I found the door. I ran my hands all over it, but it didn't seem to have a keyhole. My fingers dug into the edges and pushed. I shoved it with my shoulder, hard. No luck.
Ivy!
Screamed Roseanne.
The ceiling's coming down!
A scraping noise almost drowned out her words. Loud, like stone colliding with stone. I looked up, but blackness was all I saw. Seriously, Theon? I growled, disbelief momentarily masking my grief. This was how he planned to kill me.
The walls are moving. He said he'd do it. We're gonna die.
Not if I can help it. I continued tugging at the door. If my healing ability worked, my magic must be here somewhere. He'd sealed it with an invocation. I tried desperately to conjure up the image of the invocations the last time I'd seen them, but it was no use. I didn't have the talisman, the only other place where the invocations were written. The scraping noise grew louder, deafening, and my head filled with images of walls and ceilings closing in. Roseanne howled in terror, beating at the door alongside me, clinging to me. A clattering sounded as she tugged at my hair. An object had dropped to the floor, and with it came a glow which pierced the gloom, and revealed the ceiling coming down on our heads. Heart thudding, I glanced down at the object. It was a small explosive spell, like one of Isabel's. How would one of her spells get in here? The moving shadow that touched my hair. Did I have an ally somewhere? I'd wonder about it later. We had maybe 30 seconds before we were crushed into a human sandwich between floor and ceiling. Stand back, I warned Roseanne, who'd thrown herself, flat, sobbing in terror. I picked up the spell, snapped the elastic band, and threw it at the door. It went off like a small firework as the spell blasted a hole in the floor. More crashes sounded as the stone underfoot gave way. I scrambled back, blinking smoke from my eyes, then peered into the dark. There appeared to be some kind of tunnel or passageway below. Come on, I said to Roseanne. I don't know what's down there, but it must be better than here. The scraping noise of the moving ceiling followed as I dropped into the dark. Roseanne did too. Apparently, Theon either hadn't checked beforehand or assumed we wouldn't be able to dig through the floor to find it. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do so with my bare hands, but Isabel's spells could blast through almost anything. We weren't in the Grey Vale, and apparently witch spells worked here. Weird. But Theon had never said the castle was his. He'd stolen it. From the Morrigan.
What was that?
Roseanne moaned, running behind me until we'd plunged into a deeper tunnel, hopefully away from collapsing ceilings. Explosive spell. Don't ask me where it came from. I haven't a clue. Whoever had helped me, they were my only ally aside from Roseanne. Do you know where we are?
Tunnels. They bring the bodies out this way.
My heart lurched. She pulled away from me.
I have to go.
Wait. You don't have to stay here. She shivered.
It's not fair. She never wanted me, and now we're both his slaves.
The Morrigan. Sorry, but she was kind of a shit parent. I'd get away while you can. Roseanne sobbed.
I can't. I'm bound.
She broke off, her hands twisting into talons, and turned into her bird form. With an anguished shout, she took off in a beat of wings and flew ahead of me. Swearing, I hurried after her. I hope she's not going to warn him. She moved faster in bird form than I could walk. Now the adrenaline from my brush with death had worn off, my hands and feet had gone numb. My clothes were soaked in blood, which probably didn't help, and the tunnel seemed never-ending. Still, anything was better than getting crushed to death in a dungeon. Where did that spell come from? Who'd been hiding in the shadows to help me? I cursed quietly as I reached a crossroads. I didn't have anything to use as markers in case I got lost. I hovered, undecided, and the shadows moved on my left, forming the shape of a hand pointing right. What the hell? Okay, I seriously had some weird guardian angel looking out for me. Twice wasn't a coincidence. Follow the weird shadows, Ivy. I did so. I had a 50-50 chance of picking the right way. The ground began to slope down, and light flowed down from a window above. Daylight? I hurried after it, and my feet caught on a slip of what looked like gold foil. No, a piece of shredded paper, with the outline of a glyph on it. The invocations. Theon had torn them to pieces. One look told me there was no magic left inside them. He'd wanted to ensure nobody could use them against him again. I let the paper fall to the ground. Theon had sealed my magic using words. In fact, I was sure he'd used the same invocation I'd used myself when I'd bound Calder's magic. The shadow reappeared, pointing down the corridor. The tunnel wasn't so dark anymore, and the shadow cringed away when I looked at it. Wait, it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a pisky. The same pisky I'd let out of the room in the tower. It must have escaped the castle and somehow survived here the whole time. Thanks, I said. Think you saved my neck back there. The pisky made an agitated buzzing noise and circled around me. Be quiet, I whispered, following it to a door, open onto snowy ground, and hundreds of bodies. Redcaps, goblins, half-bloods, even the odd ogre. I gagged on the smell of decaying flesh, shuddering. The entire way out was blocked by corpses, some fresh, some not. There's no other way out, is there? The pisky buzzed ahead, leading the way, and I made the mistake of looking down at the faces of the dead. Half-bloods, wearing expressions that alternated terror and agony. I stumbled away and fell onto another bank of corpses. Redcaps. The ones I'd killed. Who'd killed? Alive! Mage alive! Yelled the pisky, buzzing over my head. Go away! I screamed. All of you, go away! I kicked the dead redcap viciously, embedding my foot in a hole in its chest. The pisky continued to circle my head as I swore, pulling my foot free. Do you want to join the dead, you annoying little shit? The Mage Master alive! What? Vance? No. Don't screw with me like that. Alive! Ivy, Mage alive! Dragon is Master Mage alive! The Dragon Shifter? No way. That kind of thinking was dangerous. In Faerie, you had reason to disbelieve the truth when you saw it with your own eyes, let alone otherwise. But the hope dangled in front of me, tantalizing even with the presence of so many dead. The pisky flew above the flood of bodies, diving down behind another bank of corpses. Be quiet, said a male voice. You foolish creature. Ivy alive! Yelled the pisky. Mage Master alive! I kicked bodies aside, climbing a dead troll skeleton like a ladder, and I didn't even think about how horrific it was. Not when I'd heard a voice I'd never dared hope I'd hear again. There, covered in blood and staring at me, was Vance. The pisky flew around his head, yelling words at random. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I could. I looked for every one of Faerie's tells. Every shift of the light, every slight difference that told me something was wrong. But the snow was real. The dead bodies were real. And Vance was alive. He was no illusion. 100% of my attention was focused on him, not scattered like when Theon had led me into a trap. If I'd been paying full attention, I'd have known his illusions for what they were. But there was no magic here at all. Not even mine. It's him. He's alive. I ran, tripping over dead bodies, forgetting the death and pain around me. He didn't move, just watched me, his body rigid with shock. Vance, you're alive! How? My words came out in sobs as I broke down. He held me close to him as I cried into his shoulder, my whole body shaking. I wiped my face, and it came away smudged with red. So much red. I got redcap guts all over you. I'm sorry. You're sorry. He stared down at me, pale underneath the blood. I saw him kill you. I saw him kill you, I said. Vance, I swear, it's me. I'm alive. Whatever his bloody illusions pulled on you, I'm alive. He hugged me tight enough to make breathing a struggle. I didn't care. He was so cold, like he'd crawled through a snowdrift, which he probably had. I'm here, Vance, I said. I'm real. I thought you died. I saw you die. I did, Vance said. Then how did this happen? I wiped my eyes. You were dead. The dragon shifter used some kind of magic on me before we came here. After I gave him the healing spell, I think it was supposed to revive me from death, because he knew Theon wouldn't spare me. I got hit by the illusion at the same time as you. I didn't know the dragon shifter had used a spell on me until I realized I didn't feel any pain during the fight with the redcaps. I tried to warn you, but there were too many of them. When I died, I swallowed, fresh tears leaking from my eyes. He'd been stabbed to death in front of me. Vance might be here now, but it'd take a long while for me to forget. If ever. Vance paused, stroking my hair, as I wiped my eyes with the back of my sleeve. When it happened, I blacked out. I woke up outside in the morgue. I believe Theon intended to have me revived as an undead and separate my spirit to fight in his army. So I managed to slip away before he realized I wasn't dead. And he's definitely gone. I saw several horsemen leave the castle, Vance said. But I didn't have a good view from down here. I kept thinking I saw you amongst the bodies. I was certain he wouldn't spare your life. I know. I'm not that important to him. I took in a shuddering breath. It's actually quite insulting. Death by collapsing ceiling? I deserved a more dignified end than that. I'm glad you're alive. Me too. And you? The dragon shifter had the power to drain the life out of someone, so it made sense that his ability could be applied the other way. But he'd performed an actual miracle. Please don't do that to me again. I'll try to avoid it in future. He still didn't let go of me. Behind the blood and grime on his face, I swore his eyes were damp too. I'll cover you in bubble wrap for the next battle, I swear. He laughed quietly and brushed a strand of hair from my blood-stained face. Ivy Lane. What am I going to do with you? This? I leaned in and kissed him. His hand wound into my hair, and I lost myself in him, as though this was our last minute alive.
"We should go,"
he murmured against my lips.
"I doubt any of this was part of Fion's plan."
Definitely not the pisky part. That was enough to convince me this wasn't a dream, because in my experience, reality was way more screwed up than anything in my head.
"No."
Vance looked at the pisky, who'd flown a short distance away, as though trying not to intrude on our private moment.
"Do you know him?"
"He was at Fion's last hideout, locked in a tower. I let him out, but he disappeared before we went back home. You gave him the spells, right?"
"I did. I knew you were in danger."
"You've saved my life. Fion used an invocation to block my magic, and he ripped my invocations to pieces. But my sword, it's got to be here somewhere." I turned to the pisky. "Did you see where he put my sword?" The pisky buzzed around my head. "Sword in tower! In East Tower! This way!" Vance and I climbed a snowy bank, leaving all the bodies behind. There, we could see the castle properly. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the design. It looked like someone had mashed together several pictures of what they thought a castle should look like and thrown buckets of snow all over it. Towers twisted at impossible angles, and the corpses spilling underneath formed a moat of old blood against the snow. The pisky flew along the bank, towards the nearest tower. Vance and I followed. Fion couldn't have gone for good, and he clearly had more she patrolling around here. I was unarmed, and with my magic gone, any she could trounce me. I shivered, trying not to look too hard at all the bodies in the bloody river. Every door was guarded, either by armoured knights or a pair of ogres. But there were no signs of Fion or his horsemen. We reached the tower. I craned my neck, and a blue light snagged my gaze. My talisman! The pisky flew above my head, jabbering and pointing at the tower, which didn't seem to have a way inside. Great. I can't fly.
"There's no need,"
said Vance.
"We just need to move closer, and then I can use my ability to get it down."
But what if it's mage-proof?
"Your sword isn't. I've moved it dozens of times."
True. I walked carefully down the snowbank. If I lost my balance, I'd roll all the way to the front doors into the path of 2 ogres, which was a shitty way to die. "Do you have any weapons?"
"I forgot Fion took yours."
Vance passed me an iron dagger.
"I lost some of them in the fight, but I'm glad I held on to that spell."
"So am I, believe me." I gripped his hand for balance as we skirted around a particularly slippery snowbank and came within sight of the doors. And, unfortunately, the ogres. One of them roared and charged at us, huge feet tearing up the snow. A dagger wasn't the best weapon to fight an 8-foot-tall beast with, but I didn't have much choice. I ducked underneath its huge green arm and stabbed, catching its arm with the edge of the knife. The ogre bellowed with rage as blood spurted. I'd hit an artery, as I'd planned. Vance moved in behind it and plunged his own knife into its leg. As the creature sank, unbalanced, I went for the throat. Ogre blood splattered the snow, and it crumpled to the ground. But the second took a swing at me, too fast for me to duck. I flew several feet into a snowbank, the wind knocked out of me. Vance snarled in rage and caught the ogre's hand in his claw, tearing through its tough skin. The snowbank moved as claws grabbed at me. A fury. I ducked its attack, scrambling to my feet, but it had me cornered against the snowbank. I struck out, my iron knife sticking in the hard skin of its clawed foot. A rush of air knocked into both of us, and a sword appeared in my hands. My sword. I swung Helena, never so grateful for its familiar presence. The Fury's head flew to the side. Holy shit! The glyphs glowed, and a burning sensation went through my hands. Magic buzzed through me like an electric current, and I damn near dropped the sword. Ivy. Vance walked over to me. Are you okay? Just about. With the return of the magic in my sword, my energy surged. All tiredness momentarily pushed aside. We should go. The Pisky reappeared, buzzing over our heads as I turned away from the palace. I've no clue how to get out. Maybe I can shift into the Grey Veil from here. I could in summer. Vance held onto my hands, ignoring the fresh blood that stained them. As soon as I was back, I was going to have to douse my clothes in a dozen cleansing spells to get the redcap guts out of them. The smell was horrible, but Vance didn't seem bothered. The Pisky landed on my shoulder as I leaned back, feeling my way through to the veil. I held on to Vance as we landed, and he moved so that he caught me in his arms as we crashed to the floor. Never thought I'd be glad to see this place. I rolled off Vance, groaning. We've got to find that dragon shifter. Why did Fionn leave him alive? I think the blow was meant to be fatal. Fionn clearly underestimated him. He pushed to his feet. Wouldn't be the first time, I said shakily. Okay, I'll find him. The path rearranged itself in front of me, and I walked. If not for my magic renewing my strength, I probably wouldn't have the energy left to walk in a straight line. As it was, I nearly slipped when the path iced over, and we reached the place Fionn had snatched us away from. Blood formed a trail to the dragon shifter's body, face down on the path. It was a miracle nothing had come to eat him or drag him away. When I got closer, I glimpsed a shimmering aura surrounding him. Maybe his magic was working to heal him. He was still breathing, anyway. I grabbed his shoulder with one hand and held Vance's hand with the other. Then I pulled us out of the Grey Veil, into the mortal realm. Chapter 17. Rise and shine, sleepyhead, said Drake's voice. Vance says you should be done napping by now. Oh, God. I sat up, squinting under the bright light. I was back in the witch's place, apparently, in one of the spare rooms. You passed out, on shifter territory. Really good job none of them were there. Oops. Is Vance okay? He's fine, but he won't say what really went down over there in Fionn's castle. I can tell he's not telling me something about that shifter dude. I don't know what he told you. I flopped back onto the pillow. Ow! Fairy time travel takes it out of you. You need a decent meal. Vance appeared at the door, carrying 2 trays, which he put down on the desk. Being antisocial? Asked Drake. No, I need to talk to Ivy. He sat down on the bed and stroked my hair with one hand. Are you feeling all right? Sure. Better than fine, knowing he was alive. He wore fresh clothes and was thoroughly blood-stain-free. We spend way too much time on one another's deathbeds these days. Vance's mouth tightened, but he attempted a smile. It's a terrible habit. He leaned in and kissed me. I twined my hands into his hair, kissing him back like there wasn't enough air. Like if I touched him for long enough, it'd erase those terrible hours when I thought he was gone forever. And that's my cue to leave, Drake said. Call if you need me for anything. I need a shower. I rubbed the back of my head, expecting to find blood. Instead, my hair was clean. I no longer felt like I'd taken a swim in a river of corpses, which was always a bonus. The witches objected to getting redcap guts on the carpet, so I used a cleansing spell or 3, explained Vance. Ah. God. I'm starving. How many days did we lose this time? 5. He passed me a cup of the energy restorative he used when his ability was overtaxed.
Isabel brought you cookies, too.
I don't deserve her. I keep disappearing and ditching her.
She was somewhat calmer about our absence than the mages were.
He conjured up an extra chair.
Come and join me for dinner.
How can I refuse that? I shuffled off the bed and over to the desk, throwing my jacket aside in the process. The damn thing had been through so many cleansing spells, it had turned brown instead of its original black color. Wait, I said. Did we bring back the dragon shifter? I owe him.
Yes, he's still unconscious. Quentin's watching him.
Good. I dug into my meal. Who else is here?
The Mage Council, Lady Harper, Wanda, half the Laurel Coven, and our dragon shifter friend.
A shriek came from outside. He paused.
And the Piskies.
Okay. Guess we're adopting one. If we get the manor back, or—
It's been decontaminated,
Vance said.
But it's up to you. When the war's over and Fion's gone—
And things are back to normal? He smiled at me.
Normal and you are never in the same room, Ivy.
Yeah, good point. I'd probably find it boring now. Vance updated me on the current situation while we ate. At least nobody else had died in our absence, despite the constant attacks from Furies over the last few days. Vance had told the council we'd encountered Fion and the Morrigan, and both were still at large, but not that we'd come so close to annihilation. Everyone knew we had an unconscious shifter here, but not what exactly he was. At least the half-fairies hadn't shown up. The chief probably thought we ditched him. God only knew how he'd react to finding out Fion had invaded Winter's territory. The chief himself might be loyal to Summer, but some of his associates were unseelie. The question remained as to whether they were too scared of Fion to retaliate, or whether they'd be desperate enough to throw themselves into a war they might not be able to win. I'd leave that question up in the air until tomorrow, because I was worn out by this point. We needed to make a plan, and I'd rather not do it with the entire Mage Council and half the witches listening in. I got to my feet. Whereabouts is the dragon shifter?
In the room next door.
I went through the corridor into the neighboring bedroom. The dragon shifter had been carefully laid on the bed and presumably doused in a cleansing spell, because he wasn't covered in blood any longer. He looked more human-like than godlike. I could actually focus on his face this time around. He and Vance had the same strong-boned features, but I only picked up on the resemblance because I knew they were very distantly related, and Vance was so familiar to me. Wonder why the shifters don't have magic, if they're descended from the fairies, I murmured to Vance.
They aren't all descended from the same ones,
Vance said.
Even in my family. My grandmother was a wolf shifter, for instance. I believe she was part human, too. There's rarely such a thing as a pure shifter these days. Shifter blood wins over human, while mage blood usually wins over shifter blood.
Yeah, you mentioned that before, I said. But if this guy's related to the shifters, he's not exactly a regular fairy. The shifters worshipped him as a god.
They did,
Vance said.
In their legends, at least. However, as we know, anyone can pretend to be one.
I looked down at the unconscious shifter again. Fion had tried to kill him and almost succeeded. I think we need to go into the Winter Court itself to find out how to beat Fion. He was originally from there, and he stole the huntsman's magic. Maybe there's a way to steal it back.
Perhaps, but destroying his talisman didn't work,
said Vance.
Which suggests he has magic like yours. That is, magic that endures beyond death. My displacing ability doesn't work on him either, but it doesn't work on the she either, or the Morrigan.
They're probably immune, I said. Or maybe it's to do with being a death fairy. I killed the banshee, but she was half-blooded. I paused. My talisman can kill anything except Fionn. He's even immune to invocations, but he destroyed them anyway. Vance's eyes widened.
You don't remember them at all?
Shit. I guess they were your family's property. Sorry about that.
It's not your fault. Fionn already said invocations can't harm him, right?
Yeah. When I faced him by the cauldron, he said the huntsman can't be affected by commands except his duty, which is, transporting the dead. But does she use an invocation when they exile someone? When I sent the Morrigan out of this realm, it felt familiar. I've seen through Avocus's eyes before, when I had the visions in the forest, and what it felt like to be exiled. I'm sure it's the same invocation they use to send their own people away. Only the words of the gods are powerful enough to subdue the Sidhe.
Vance nodded. If Fionn used to be one of the Sidhe, all they'd have needed to do when they found out he was a thief and a traitor was to use one of those invocations on him.
I nodded. It's kind of ingenious, in a way, how he made himself immune. But he was never a slave. He's too big-headed to have come from nowhere.
I agree, Vance said. Fionn lied. He lied about his position, about the source of his power. He may yet have lied to us recently. Did he say anything to you when you were captive?
He got pissed with me for calling him a spoiled brat throwing a tantrum, I said. But yeah, other weaknesses might help. He must have one. He's been over-enthusiastic about covering his bases to compensate for the fact that he's not really an immortal, even if he's working with... I trailed off. Wait. Holy crap. I know why he enslaved the Morrigan.
Why?
Because she can rip out souls, and maybe reattach them. Think about it. Fionn's lost his cauldron, his one shot at being reunited with his body if he dies. If one of us kills him, if his spirit leaves his body, maybe she can preserve his spirit until he finds a new body to possess. She definitely has some kind of power along those lines.
I get it, said Vance. Yes, that must be why she's shadowing him. But is she more powerful than he is?
Not if he enslaved her. I didn't get a good look at that chain on her ankle, but what they have is more than a vow arrangement. He's got a hold over her somehow. Maybe an invocation. I managed to use one on her before.
So we kill her first. When she's dead, we destroy Fionn before he can resurrect.
Easy, I said. About as easy as extracting fire imps from a burning house anyway. But you know what? I don't care. We have a plan.
Fairy magic still doesn't work in our realm, Vance reminded me. We'll need to find a way to work around that, but iron should be enough.
Yes, but... Shit! I forgot. He cut off death.
Completely. You can still cross over the veil in our realm, can't you?
Yeah, but if I kill him, he'll turn into a wraith again. My sword can't kill his spirit. Not to mention he drained all death's energy into his own realm. He has all the power. I stopped. Easy as extracting fire imps from a burning house had been upgraded to easy as putting out a fire with a chimera's tongue, which is to say, almost impossible. Not if our army was all human. I needed the Sidhe. If need be, I'd walk into the heart of both courts and demand they take action, starting with Winter.
You're right, said Vance. We can't do it alone. If he has death fairies on his side, and we don't fully understand how they operate, we need inside knowledge. The Queen of the Unseelie surely has understanding of her people, even the death fairies.
I doubt she'll talk to us. I sighed. The Earl King of the Seelie Court was inaccessible. They're she, they can hide wherever they like.
Not if we have a strong case to bring to them, Vance said. Representatives for our cause.
Oh. We need to reform the Council of 12.
Yes, said Vance. Or something like it. Unity of all the supernatural races across all our realms. It won't do to meet in secret like before. Everyone needs to know this time.
You're right. We wouldn't be in half as much trouble if the last council had decided to actually tell other people they existed. Also, the last council pretty much all died. Well, aside from Frank, but he was already dead. And none of the necromancers are exactly capable of fighting at the moment, let alone coming here.
True, said Vance. But we have representatives from the other supernatural groups.
The mages, the witches. Not the half-fairies. I suppose we do. But the shifters probably won't go for it.
I intend to speak to them tomorrow. I've asked Quentin to bring someone from Summer to assist us too.
You know what happened last time.
By now, Summer will be aware of what's happening in Winter. They won't want to end up the same.
I sighed. Better hope you're right. It's bad enough that we'll probably have to have a screaming match with the Unseelie Queen before she agrees to fight with us. If she agrees to fight with us. She wouldn't take an attack on her own realm lightly, but the Unseelie didn't see mortals as people at all. Every winter fairy I've met has been a death guard or similar, and you know how that turns out. Even Roseanne. I stopped. Did you see where she went?
No. Was she in the castle?
Yeah. Fion's servant. I'd say we need to find her, but she might have gone to warn him. He put her under a vow. The Morrigan, too. It's her castle he stole. She was queen of the Death Fairies. It's part of the Winter Court, so the queen must know it's under Fion's control. He's stealing her magic, too.
Then her people ought to listen to us, said Vance.
You'd think so, but fairies make no freaking sense.
I think they have their own kind of logic. It just isn't as familiar to us.
Yeah. I sort of understand Fion. I think I get how the She operate, too. Problem is, they play with words and make everything into a complicated song and dance, as though we have all the time in the world, which we don't.
Precisely why we need someone to negotiate on our behalf, Vance said. However, the state of Winter's territory might be enough to prompt her to take action.
Yeah, but I can't say I know how to get there alone.